Imagine a young girl being excited about going to her senior year of high school, a talented athlete, popular in real life but also online, with a social media following of over 10,000 people. But then, the unthinkable happens. She vanishes without a trace. Now, to Virginia, Lovingston, Virginia, to be exact. But in order for me to take you there, we have to go back to Charlottesville, Virginia on June 5th, 1996. That's the day that Alexis Tiara Murphy was born to her mom, Laura Ann Murphy, and her father, Troy William Brown. Alexis has 3 brothers, Avery and Cameron Murphy, and Noah Thompson. Ultimately, Alexis and her mom moved about 40 minutes away from Charlottesville to rural Lovingston, Virginia, and lived with Laura's parents, Gail and Tony Taylor. Now, this town had a population of about 520. Here's what it looks like on the map. We can see a couple of churches, a market, some coffee shops, a bookstore, a library, and it looks as though McDonald's is the only or the main fast food restaurant in that area. Other than that, there are just a small number of homes scattered throughout the area and nothing but nature after that. And it was okay, because if anyone needed more than what this area had to offer, they could go to Lynchburg, Virginia, which was about a 35-minute drive. Lynchburg is a major city. It has everything that you would expect from a big city. But Lovingston was fine for Alexis and her family. They were very close, and as a matter of fact, she spent a lot of time with her 2 aunts, Angela and Trina. They were almost like big sisters to her. But Alexis grew up with so many cousins, and they were so close that her cousins were actually like siblings. She was also still close to her father, Troy. The family would frequently get together for birthdays, holidays, and any other reason they could find to throw a good party. Alexis was well taken care of. She had a very strong support system in her family, as well as her close-knit community in Lovingston, where everyone knew one another. They were always there to lend a helping hand. Alexis grew up to be a happy, smiling little girl. She was always laughing, running around, having fun, and Alexis was also very beautiful. Everyone could see that. When I first saw her, I thought, wow, that is one of the most beautiful girls that I have ever seen. There's just something special about Alexis. And as she grew up, she grew into a gorgeous young lady, and she was very popular. She excelled in sports, and by high school, she was one of the most valuable players on her volleyball team. By the time Alexis was 15 and attending Nelson County High School, she, like many other teenagers her age, was really into social media. I think it's only gotten more popular for younger people to get online at a younger age. Alexis's platform of choice back then was Twitter. She wasn't just a casual user, she would tweet multiple times a day and sometimes multiple times an hour. She wouldn't just post updates sharing her thoughts. She would post pictures, videos, quotes, and surprisingly, at least for me, she was making her own memes back then. She started her account in 2010, but I could only go back to about 2012. By 2013, she had gained a following of about 11,000 people. That is a lot by the standards back then, especially for the average everyday teenager her age. Usually, someone like her in a town like hers maybe had 50 or 100 followers, and it was people they knew in real life, but not Alexis. Her Twitter just blew up. I think having more followers can fuel this inclination to post more, because sometimes it feels like there's an obligation to entertain people who choose to give you that follow. Then I realized, realizing that our online presence may one day be the only thing we leave behind is a little bit scary, since there's also the thought, is this person portraying their real self? We know how much social media can be contrived, and I think it's got to be a mixture. Alexis opened up a lot on Twitter. She would share sketches that she made, pictures of herself in cute outfits, and even a new piercing. She already had her nose pierced, but on December 3rd, 2012, she showed off a new Monroe piercing. It's the one in the upper lip that's supposed to emulate Marilyn Monroe's beauty mark. She had a diamond stud put in, and I think it looked really good on her. Her username was The Real Folarin, and this intrigued me, so I looked it up. This is the last name in the title of the 8th mixtape by an American rapper named Whale Folarin. It was released on December 24th, 2012. The mixtape features guest appearances from Rick Ross, 2 Chainz, Scarface, Nipsey Hussle, just to name a few. Alexis was a big fan of not just music, but Wales music. She would frequently post song lyrics, and she would even sing in videos on her posts. Her favorite song by Whale was Love Hate Thing, and it's really good. I listened to it, and there was this one line that stuck out to me, and sure enough, I wasn't surprised that it was one of Alexis's favorites too. She posted it here: "They're gonna love you a little different when you're at the top." That's very true. Alexis wanted to be on top too. She had a lot of dreams. By the summer of 2013, Alexis was 17, going into her senior year of high school. She was the captain of her volleyball team, number 9, and she dreamed of playing at the college level. She also liked basketball and softball, but at 5 feet 9 inches, she excelled in volleyball. That was her sport, and she loved it. Maybe it had something to do with some of her teenage angst, because she definitely had some. I know she was kidding, but she followed up her post about loving volleyball with, "I just want to hit girls in the head with volleyballs all day." None of us go through life without getting upset, frustrated, and annoyed, and Alexis went through all of those emotions. But she celebrated more than she complained, and when she did complain, it was the usual things, like having to get up early, go to work, a guy ghosting her, not finding a guy to commit, people only talking about her looks, the things that a normal teenager would complain about, and rightfully so. Alexis celebrated a lot of things that she loved. She loved food. Who doesn't? Her favorite places were Subway, McDonald's, and Starbucks. She also liked Chinese food, and she talked about craving it a lot. The thing I saw on her Twitter was related to Starbucks. She tweeted, "Let me find out that they have a Starbucks inhaler. Yes, please let me know." Because I could definitely say with confidence, I am a Starbucks lover, a Starbucks addict. It's what got me through grad school, and it's what gets me through these cases for you. Caffeine is my drug of choice. Alexis tweeted, "Why is Starbucks my weakness? It's definitely mine too." Alexis was very mature for her age. She was very intelligent, outgoing, loved to dance, enjoyed getting her hair done, liked makeup, and dreamed of driving a Range Rover. She enjoyed bidding on things on eBay, but didn't like to be outbid, and I can relate. If she couldn't get her Starbucks fix, she would opt for a McDonald's frappe. After all, that was the closest fast food restaurant. She would go there every single day, but not for the food, for the fun. Yes, McDonald's. The one in her area was actually connected to a gas station. It was called Liberty Gas Station, and it became a local hangout for teenagers in Lovingston. There weren't many places for them to go after school or before school, so they would hang out at the McDonald's and the gas station. But there were times she didn't mind going to Lynchburg for a craving. For example, she would drive there for a pretzel, and her dad would let her borrow his white 2003 Nissan Maxima. Alexis was very trustworthy, she was responsible, so her dad had no problem letting her take the car anytime she needed it. However, she did have a nightly curfew. She had to be home by 11 p.m., and she never missed her curfew, not one time. That is how reliable Alexis was. Another thing people knew about Alexis is that she never went anywhere without her white iPhone. If they would have had pink, I could guarantee you Alexis would have chosen pink. That was her favorite color. But if there was something else you could rely on when it came to knowing Alexis, it's that she would not let her phone die. She would carry around an extension cord just so it would stay charged. Her aunt would make jokes about it all the time, that she would hear Alexis coming by the sound of her slippers shuffling across the floor and the extension cord dragging behind her. Alexis was the type of girl who would talk to kids that no one else would talk to in school. She was loving. She enjoyed listening to others and giving honest advice when she could. She absolutely adored her 3 brothers, even though they annoyed the heck out of her sometimes, and she cared about others. She cared about things like the Columbine High School shooting. She posted this on April 20th, 2013. This is the 420 that really should be remembered, referring to the massacre that happened in Colorado on April 20th, 1999. And speaking of 420, I'm just going to get this out of the way now. Yes, it seemed like she liked smoking weed. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but I'm only taking what I found from Twitter and making my observations. This is going to become something that's talked about, so I figured I would get it out of the way. She frequently posted about wanting to smoke and would post pictures and videos of her smoking. There's still quite a stigma when it comes to marijuana, so take it as you will. From everything I read, Alexis was a normal teenager from a small town. She had big dreams, was inspired by music that emphasized the ability to become something and leave the past behind but never forget where you came from. She wanted true happiness and love, but she was going through all the growing pains that we go through to find it, and voicing them all publicly. I could feel her pain. She was definitely on the right track. In the summer of 2013, she was excited about entering her final year of high school. As a matter of fact, she was in the middle of planning her senior pictures. She was having them taken in August before the fall semester began. This is necessary so that you could get your picture in the yearbook. It used to take a while for them to process the pictures and get them ready for publication. Laura, Alexis's mom, agreed to gift her a trip to the hair salon in preparation, and Alexis had already picked out a style she wanted and made an appointment with a stylist out in Lynchburg for Saturday, August 3rd, after she finished working. She actually worked at a thrift store in Charlottesville on the weekends and during the week in the summer. From what I could tell, Laura instilled a work ethic in Alexis. Laura works at a local post office, and sometimes she would put in overtime or work the night shift just to provide for her family. She didn't mind helping Alexis when she needed something, especially because she was a good student, a talented athlete, and worked her own job to get extra things that she wanted. Friday was filled with fun at a family barbecue, and she hung out with her Aunt Trina and all of her cousins. Alexis would routinely share her plans on Twitter with her followers. She let her community know where she was headed, like this post on January 16, 2013, off to North Carolina after I clean my room. It was no different on Saturday, August 3rd. She posted Bergbound, and after getting money from Laura for her hair, she headed out to work in Charlottesville and planned to drive to Lynchburg for that appointment when she got off. Her last tweet was at 3:40 p.m. She tweeted, "I actually look cute right now," and then it's as though Alexis vanished. It was the next morning, Sunday, August 4th, when Alexis's grandma Gail went into her bedroom to check on her. But when she opened the door, Alexis wasn't in her bed. She wasn't home. Gail was the first person to realize that Alexis had never come home the night before, and that was unlike her. Gail called Alexis, but she got no answer, and that was a major red flag. Alexis would always answer. Always. Gail's very first thought was that Alexis could have gotten in a car accident trying to get to Lynchburg or back into town, and she was worried. Gail checked with Laura, who had worked the overnight shift at the post office and wasn't home yet. She called her asking if she knew where her daughter was, and Laura was confused. She said, "What do you mean she didn't come home last night?" Well, the white Nissan wasn't in the driveway, and Alexis wasn't there. Laura called Alexis's dad, Troy, asking if Alexis had possibly gone to his place the night before, but Troy said, "No, I haven't seen her." They were both trying hard not to panic, but the fact that Alexis left alone, broke curfew for the first time, and didn't return his car was frightening. Terrible thoughts started to fly through his head. Alexis was still not answering her phone, and it seemed like it was off. It was going straight to her voicemail, and this was unlike her. Everybody knew Alexis would not let her phone die no matter what. She would plug in multiple extension cords just so that it could still be accessible while she walked through the whole house when it had to be charged. This was very unlike her. So Laura took Troy's advice. He said to call the police, but instead of calling them, Laura went down to the Nelson County Sheriff's Department in person to explain what was going on. And get this, the officers there had never filled out a missing persons report. Never. This was actually the very first one they had ever completed. So this gives you a perfect example of how uncommon this was. This didn't happen in Nelson County. It took them longer than usual to figure out the process, and Laura just waited patiently as she could, even though she had become more and more worried. especially considering she had contacted various family members and friends, and none of them had seen Alexis since the day before. After the case was created, it was handed off to Nelson County Sheriff's investigator William Everett Mays Jr. We're going to call him Billy Mays because that's what he went by. He had never investigated a missing person until he was given Alexis Murphy's case. This really was his first rodeo, but at least he knew the first thing he had to do was get an understanding of who Alexis was and where she was last seen. So he started with interviewing Laura, followed by Alexis's family members, her grandparents that lived with her, her brothers, all her aunts and uncles, her cousins, to get as much information as he possibly could. He was dealing with a young woman, someone that he thought could have possibly wanted to disappear. This is an age where teenagers are transitioning into true adulthood. They test the waters of what they can get away with, and sometimes they make adult decisions thinking that they know it all. He thought that that's what they could be dealing with. Maybe Alexis didn't want to be found, but her family was adamant that that was not the case. No way. She overshared on social media. Even if it was her intention to leave her family, she would not have left her Twitter following out of the loop. That was another place Mays wanted to take a good hard look, but first, he focused on Alexis's family. Her Aunt Trina told him that she was Alexis's great aunt, and that Alexis was incredibly humble. She was a genuine person, and she would not have let her phone die. She said the last time she saw her was that Friday, at the cookout. The last thing she said to her was, "I love you, and I'll see you later." Alexis's cousin, Jasmine Murphy, said that Alexis would never have left town without telling anyone. She hung out with her on Wednesday, July 31st, after volleyball camp. Alexis went out to Madison Heights with Jasmine to get Jasmine's eyebrows done, and then they went out for Chinese food together. On the way home, they stopped at McDonald's to get a frappe, and then she dropped Alexis off at home. They texted on Friday, but they hadn't talked on August 3rd. Plus, Alexis was excited about her senior year. She was looking forward to playing volleyball, and Jasmine had been the assistant coach for Alexis's team for 2 years. She saw Alexis grow as a player, and she knew how seriously Alexis took the sport. None of the evidence that Mays was gathering at this point was leading him to believe that Alexis ran away from home. He knew that she had plans to get her hair done. When he called to see if she made it to that appointment, the stylist informed him that she did not. Meanwhile, Laura was taking matters into her own hands. She couldn't just sit around waiting, and with modern technology, we can all do something. We can all be investigators. The internet is a very powerful tool. Laura knew that the iPhone had the Find My iPhone feature on it, so they put Alexis's number into the app, and they were shocked when a location popped up on the map. I can only imagine that mixture of elation and fear, but mostly fear at this point because of where the location was. It was in an area called Oak Ridge, which was about a 10-minute drive from their home. But it's where Oak Ridge is that worried them right away. It's along a major highway called Route 29, and this is a corridor that passes through a very rural area. It's pretty much in the middle of nowhere, and it's very well known as a place where a number of females have gone missing over the last few years, all of them traveling alone when they disappeared. As you probably understand, Alexis's family, they're beside themselves, they're confused and they're scared, but they give all of this information to investigator Mays. It's the first lead, and it came from the people who cared about Alexis the most. They were not going to give up. Actually, they were on the case faster than the Nelson County Sheriff's Office. Because of social media, everyone was reaching out on their respective platforms, whether it was Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even MySpace, and posting about Alexis, asking the public to please give them any information that they could about her whereabouts, or if they had seen her, please come forward. They were desperate for answers, and they knew the more time that went by, the less likely it would be that Alexis would be found or alive. It's a race against time. The family quickly got the media involved, which wasn't hard since this town is so small, and this is such big news. The first missing persons case, a beautiful young girl vanishing out of nowhere. So the family held a press conference, begging for the safe return of their loved one. Her Aunt Angela was sobbing and begging the public for help. She also put out a public message to her niece. She said, "Alexis, just know that we're working on bringing you home because we all miss you." It was a very emotional time for our family, and now the community is coming forward to help in any way that they can. There were hundreds of people coming together asking, "How can we help? How can we take action?" The town is known as a place where the residents are friendly. They open their arms to anyone and everyone, and everybody knows everyone. That can be a double-edged sword. They know you, so they care, but they know you, so they know all of your business. One of them could be involved, you never know. But the family would take any help they could get at this point. Nelson County investigators are searching the surrounding area. They're looking all around town for clues, but once they get that lead about Oak Ridge, their focus shifts, and Mays makes his way out there to where Alexis's phone was last active, according to the Find My iPhone app. When investigators are looking around, they don't see a car. That's the first thing they're trying to locate because they know she was driving the white Nissan, but they don't see it anywhere in that area. The thing about this area, though, is that there are thousands of acres of land, and this phone was pinging near Oak Ridge Mansion. This specific location is known for weddings and other really big events like that, and they realize that they're going to have to search this area. Since it's a very small sheriff's department, they call in volunteers from the area, and there's a huge gathering. Everyone wanted to help. By 6:30 p.m. that evening, there was actually a state trooper helicopter in the air looking over this area for her car. Not only that, even though this is a small town, this was a big case already, especially with social media buzzing and her large following, and the town putting pressure on the sheriff's office. The first FBI agent was actually on the scene by 7:15 p.m. on August 4th. When Alexis's family gets the word that her phone pinged off of Oak Ridge Mansion, that kind of puts up a red flag because they know someone who works at Oak Ridge Mansion. His name is Abraham Gray. He was actually the ex-boyfriend of Alexis's mama, Laura. Alexis had always looked up to Abraham. She saw him as a father figure when he was in her life, and they got along great. He was very close to Alexis and her family. But of course, after he and Laura broke up, he wasn't as close or in communication with them. So they wondered, was Alexis still in communication with Abraham? Did she need something? Did she go there for help? What was going on? They now need to find Abraham and ask him, when was the last time you saw Alexis? Abraham wasn't working at Oak Ridge Mansion when they came out there to search that day, but they do manage to track him down and ask him a lot of questions. The first one was, do you have anything to do with Alexis's disappearance? And he's like, no, I haven't even talked to Alexis. I have nothing to do with her going missing. I didn't even know she was missing. When they tell him when she went missing, he lets them know he wasn't even in town at that time. But investigator Mays thinks it's just a little too much of a coincidence. The fact that this person works there, he knows the family, there's a connection. So he digs in deeper, but with all the technology that they have, they're able to look at his phone records, and they know where his phone was pinging that night, and it was in a completely different location. So they were able to clear him, for now, anyway. While these investigators, volunteers, and the family are going through this entire plot of land, as beautiful as it was, this beautiful estate built in 1802 with these breathtaking views of the Blue Ridge Mountains, it's also a place that elicits a lot of fear in the family and the community, knowing just how vast it is. There's a lot of places for someone to go missing in this area. Not only that, there are fields as far as the eye can see, but there's also heavily wooded areas, with creeks and bushes and all kinds of wild animals, things that would be very dangerous for a young girl. It's also a very secluded area. You could definitely get lost out there. If you were deep in those woods, no one would even hear you scream if something bad happened to you, especially if you were there against your will. And this is the main focus of the investigation at this point, because this is where the iPhone app said Alexis was located last. I mean, look at the bird's eye view. You can see just how vast this land is. Another thing I want to point out is that even though it was only a 10-minute drive, this was a drive that was out of the way from where Alexis should have been headed. The estate itself has over 4,800 acres. Investigators are thinking there could have been some kind of car accident. Maybe she went off the road. so they're looking everywhere in that area. But after a few hours, and with all their expertise and even the FBI coming in, they start to brainstorm once again. They theorize they could be off track. Even as great as the technology is for Find My iPhone, and I think you might know what I'm talking about, it's not always 100% accurate. I know this firsthand, okay? I have definitely used the location services on my phone to locate friends, family members, and it's not always on point. It'll give you a vicinity, but they really feel like they're looking in the wrong direction. And at this point, the media is really starting to get more and more involved. There are stations coming from out of town. At this point, that is when the state police get involved. Now, unlike other cases that I've done about small towns, this is happening very fast. This is only one day, the first day of the search, and they already have FBI agents out there. Now, Virginia State Police are coming out to assist the search and to coordinate with these other departments to try to think of their next focal point. There is one big reason that this was such a big deal, and it had a lot to do with why this case got picked up, other than obvious reasons which you may have already thought of, like how beautiful Alexis was. Some people don't like it when it's mentioned that these cases snowball and get bigger and bigger when someone like Alexis is involved. Someone who has that beautiful smile, someone with their whole life ahead of them, someone that you can imagine is like your own daughter. She's young, she's beautiful, with so much potential. But there's something else. She's not the only one. I mentioned this earlier. Route 29, the highway that Oak Ridge Estate is located off of, had a number of open and ongoing cases involving Route 29. Young girls just like Alexis had gone missing. As a matter of fact, there was a suspected serial killer who authorities believed was using Route 29 to capture his victims, who were usually young women traveling by themselves. There were too many similarities to Alexis's case for the state not to get involved. A number of these mysterious crimes had happened in the past few years, and at last count, there were 32 young women and men that were missing on some portion of Route 29. You know, I don't like to go on tangents in my videos. That's why I make sure to write everything out that I'm going to talk to you about. However, when I do a case, and there are other individuals that I feel I should mention for the sake of getting their names out there and telling their stories, I will briefly do so. I think it's really important in this case, and it's definitely relevant, and you will know why in just a second when I start to tell you what happened on Route 29. Since 1996, there has been an unusually high number of young women that have gone missing along this corridor in Virginia. 5 women disappeared between 2009 and 2014. The person that the authorities thought was responsible was dubbed the Route 29 stalker. That person has still never been identified. However, a man named Richard Mark Evanitz was a serial killer who had taken the lives of women in that area from 1996 until at least 2002. He was involved in the murder of at least 3 teenage girls, a girl named Sophia Silva and sisters Kristen and Katie Lisk, in addition to kidnapping a girl in South Carolina. However, investigators knew that Richard had nothing to do with Alexis's disappearance, since he took his own life in 2002 when the police surrounded him in an attempt to make an arrest. So many people think the Route 29 stalker still exists, and witnesses have seen a man flagging women down who were driving alone. But going back to Alexis, there were 3 recent unsolved cases that authorities were concerned may be connected to Alexis's disappearance. The first one was the murder of Morgan Harrington. She was a 20-year-old Virginia Tech student that went missing from a Metallica concert in Charlottesville in 2009. Her body was found on a farm on January 26, 2010. The second case was the disappearance of Samantha Ann Clark. She was last seen in Orange, Virginia, which was close to Charlottesville. She was at her home and left a little after midnight. She didn't have a car, so it's suspected that someone came to pick her up, and she was never seen again. The last one prior to Alexis going missing was the case of Sage Smith, also known as Unique, a 19-year-old transgender woman last seen in Charlottesville on November 20th, 2012. She was on her way to meet a date, and she was never seen again. Now, just about a year later, Alexis is gone, and these cases are way too similar to overlook. There is a possibility that they're connected, and this is one of the major reasons why people think that the state police and all these other agencies got involved, open cases that could potentially be solved as they investigate Alexis's disappearance. So as they're searching, these other women are on the top of their minds as well. By noon the next day, Monday, August 5th, there were at least 80 agents from the FBI throughout the small town of Lovingston, and soon there would be more. Over 200 investigators from different agencies would be working this case in just a couple of days. Something else happened on Monday. It's when Alexis's volleyball team resumed their weekly practices, this time without number 9, their star athlete. They came together as a team to encourage one another, to support Alexis's family, and to pray for her safe return. Many of them were in shock, especially parents. They didn't expect something like this to happen in their community, and a hashtag was started on Twitter and across all the other platforms. Bring Alexis Murphy home. Her picture was everywhere. You couldn't get on social media without someone in the community reposting something about Alexis. Still, there was no sign of her, but something was about to be revealed. Something big. A huge lead came in that very next day, on Tuesday, August 6th. That evening, somebody called into the Nelson County Sheriff's Department with a tip. They'd been watching the news and saw information about Alexis Murphy, along with the description and the picture of the Nissan Maxima. A light bulb just went off in this person's head, and they remembered seeing what they thought could have been that vehicle. They said that they saw it in the Carmike Theater parking lot, none other than Charlottesville. We've heard this city before. This is the one where all those other girls went missing from, and now Alexis's car was said to be spotted in this town. I'm sure you know that the police get hundreds of tips all the time, and they have to look into each and every one, but they're not getting their hopes up yet. However, if it really is her car, this could be big. This location was about 40 miles north of Lovingston and 70 miles north of Lynchburg. Yes, it's true she worked in Charlottesville, so it wasn't completely out of the ordinary for her to be in that area. But they knew she was traveling to Lynchburg to get her hair done, so why would her car be at a movie theater parking lot when she had no plans, as far as anybody knew, to attend a movie that evening when she disappeared? On Tuesday night, agents, including Billy Mays, went to the Carmike 6 Cinema parking lot on Gardens Boulevard off of US 29, and sure enough, there it was, the white Nissan Maxima abandoned in this parking lot. The detectives circled the vehicle, looking inside, and they couldn't see Alexis or anything suspicious about the car from the outside looking in. But this is huge because the license plate matched WYN 3706, an exact match in the make, model, and license plate, but no Alexis. While no Alexis, from what they could see by looking through the windows, they had something that they needed to do. Something that every officer dreads. They had to open the trunk. Statistically speaking, so many individuals are found deceased in either the trunk of their own car or someone else's, but they knew they were going to have to open it up. They were going to have to check it. That was Investigator Mays' biggest fear. He thought he was going to open up that trunk and that Alexis was going to be inside. But when he opened it, he was shocked, surprised, and also confused and relieved all at the same time. She wasn't in the trunk. So where was she? Another thing that wasn't there was her phone or any of her personal belongings, just her dad's abandoned car at a place that no one expected her to be, in the completely opposite direction of where she had an appointment to get her hair done. Detectives now have something tangible that they can look through, that they can fingerprint, that they can analyze, but they also have something else, a location. And with the location, they have one of their biggest, most reliable pieces of evidence, and that is CCTV cameras. They know that the next day is going to consist of them going through every single business that is in the vicinity of this location and gathering up all the footage from the day of August 3rd all the way until that person called in the tip. They're going to go through hours and hours, hundreds of hours of footage until they find out how that car ended up in that parking lot and who was driving it. Was it Alexis? And if so, when did she get out of the car? Where did she go? This was huge. They thought it might actually solve the entire case by getting the right piece of footage. At this point, Alexis's family comes together and they create a Facebook page called Help Find Alexis Murphy. The first post is on the next day, August 7th, and it says, "New update. Investigators say they found several items of interest inside the car Tuesday night. After that preliminary search, officials sealed the car and towed it away so that they can conduct a more thorough search." Now, I wasn't able to find any information about what was found inside the vehicle. I did not find anything with thorough details. But the most important thing was that the detectives needed to scour those videos, and as they did, they finally found something. They spotted Alexis's vehicle pulling into that parking lot on Sunday night around 10 o'clock p.m., but the video quality, like so many other cases that I have done, was really bad. When are we going to fix this? When are we going to be able to tell what something is right away? When is it going to be perfect night vision? But this was back in 2013, okay? But they can't tell who is getting out of that vehicle. What they can tell is that the person gets out, walks out of frame, and it looks like they're walking into the woods. There's one thing that Alexis's family said. That isn't Alexis, because they know she's scared of the dark. They think there is no way she would park that late at night in an area like that and get out of the car and walk into the darkness. The sheriff's office decided to go get some canines to go to the car and see if they could pick up a scent. Maybe they can track this scent to where the person went after they exited the vehicle. And guess what? The dogs do track a scent across the parking lot and into a nearby apartment complex. But something I want to point out is that there is a lot of investigation going on simultaneously. There are investigators back in Lovingston, some in Charlottesville, and others doing a thorough search of her social media platforms, which I'm definitely going to have to talk about in just one moment. They're all trying to connect the dots, come back together, and brainstorm about what they should do next. And that's exactly what they were doing that night at the car with the canines. They were getting together, and here's a picture of all the different agencies standing outside that white Nissan Maxima, trying to figure out what they're going to do next. So let's go back to the agents that were interviewing residents of that apartment complex where the dogs tracked the scent. It turns out there were no connections to Alexis. Nobody that lived there was connected to her, as far as anyone being a friend, boyfriend, or someone she could have been hanging out with. As they spoke to many different residents of the apartment complex, they didn't get any leads. There just weren't any tips generated from that search. They really wanted to figure out why the car would be there. One thing they really wanted to get to the bottom of was how long the vehicle had been sitting in this parking lot. The biggest thing for investigators is to build a timeline, a solid timeline, as solid as it can be, of where Alexis was at what time throughout the days she had gone missing. If they could narrow that down, it would help them in so many ways. It's going to help them with potential suspects at some point if they want to compare. It's going to help them with alibis, and it's going to help them with other locations and the connections of those as well. Remember that Alexis went missing on Saturday. This car was pulling into this parking lot on Sunday night at 10 p.m. That's a lot of time. They've now expanded the search 30 miles south and 30 miles north of this car, and they were even trying to pull camera footage from public transportation, like buses. After brainstorming, they get a new idea. But before I go into that direction, I told you we're going to dive into Alexis's social media presence, specifically her Twitter account. From the very beginning, her influence, so to speak, and the amount of followers that she had was pivotal in the search. Since there were so many people that kept up with her on a regular basis, some of them probably felt like they knew her and would obviously notice if she wasn't posting and be interested in what happened to her. So from the very beginning, the word was spreading fast. Once people were aware that Alexis was missing, some of the first clues that really solidified that Alexis was going to Lynchburg came from her Twitter. The tweet that said "Bergbound" was significant. Now, the authorities that were initially investigating from the Nelson County Sheriff's Department didn't exactly know how to use social media the way that a teenager would. It was actually Alexis's friends and family that pointed out there's more than one way to look at what Alexis was tweeting. If you go to Twitter, you'll notice there's a tab that says Tweets, and naturally people will probably assume that means those are all the tweets from Alexis. And that's true. Her tweets show up there, as well as anything she retweeted from someone else. But there's another tab to the right called Tweets and Replies. In this section, you're going to find tweets from Alexis that she created, but you're also going to see tweets where she's replying to someone else that tweeted mentioning her. I know probably all of you know how to use Twitter, but for those of you that don't, this is what investigators were learning from her friends and family. This section could give them a lot more insight into who Alexis was and who she was corresponding with. And that's the thing. The person that got out of that vehicle could be anyone. It could be any one of the 12,000 people that were actively keeping up with Alexis. I say 12,000 because by the time investigators start to look at her Twitter after they find that car, she's already gained 1,000 more followers. They wondered if one of them was stalking her. Social media truly is a double-edged sword. It's what my senior thesis was about in college. I did an original research paper about the effects of social media and whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing in our lives. And that's the question. Is it our friend or our enemy? It's something I've thought about and that I really like to study, because enemies can be lurking in the shadows behind keyboards in a dark basement, but next to you at the exact same time, in the sense that they can follow your every move from afar. They can plan their evil deeds behind closed doors, out of the sight of authorities and anyone else who can identify them, because they come out of the shadows. It could be your biggest fan, someone that praises you every time you post, but it could actually be your biggest enemy. It wasn't that hard for me to figure out where she lived. It says right on the top of her Twitter, right here on her profile, Nelson County. Considering there's only one main road going through Nelson County, it wouldn't be out of the question that a stalker might just wait there until they caught a glimpse of Alexis. She definitely stood out in a crowd, but if she hadn't added her location, I could have figured it out from posts that she made, like this one. The fact that I have to work tomorrow, that's July 31st, 2013, and just a day later, she says, Charlottesville morning traffic and rain. So you can put two and two together. It's pretty obvious she's working in Charlottesville during the summer. Earlier that day, she said she was in Madison Heights. Not only that, she wouldn't have even had to post anything publicly. Someone could have been corresponding with her over DM, and we would never see it publicly. Or it could be someone slick, talking to her like they're her friend, and sooner or later, maybe she'll hint about where she works in Charlottesville. Maybe she'll give them her phone number, or maybe she'll even agree to meet them. Investigators are thinking that this might have been the case because she even tweets about, DMing people with her number when she's in her replies on Twitter. There's something else they notice, and before I say this, I have to tell you something. There's a difference between victimology and victim blaming. Victimology is the study of the victim, including their patterns, their lives, their behaviors, and where they hang out. Victimology is not just about finding out what happened to a victim in a particular case. It is also a study of how victims' behaviors can ultimately shape them into becoming vulnerable to becoming a victim. This is a science. This is something law enforcement uses. Now, criminology studies criminals' minds, and victimology studies the minds of individuals who are victimized by criminals. A lot of times when someone would mention certain factors that may have contributed to a criminal mind wanting to target a particular person, people can see it as victim blaming. And let me tell you this, there is no one to blame for something happening to a victim except for the criminal, period. Nobody deserves bad things to happen to them, especially innocent people who are victimized and targeted. But one of the things investigators notice is that Alexis likes to show off the way that she looks, her physical appearance. There's nothing particularly wrong with that. We're proud of the way we look, and sometimes we like our outfits. We think we look cute that day and want to show it off, especially when you're younger. But what might look cute to Alexis could look a lot different to someone who has a criminal mind. A predator is going to look at those pictures from a very different perspective. It's one of the reasons investigators theorize that she had so many followers. It's kind of hard to tell how old she is. Some may argue that a video like this one could have her appearing as though she's an adult when we know she isn't. I told you she likes to dance, but videos like this one could possibly give someone with a warped mind a different idea. Lieutenant Billy Mays quoted, "It's a breeding ground for predators," but Alexis's Aunt Trina said that she knew her niece, and she knows how she was raised. She thought it was completely normal for teenagers, and I can understand where her aunt is coming from. Alexis was gorgeous, and unfortunately some of the things she tweeted could have been taken the wrong way by the wrong people. Some of her pictures and some posts that other people created that she decided to repost with her own captions and comments could be looked at as worrisome because of her age. Someone can look at her like an adult, but that doesn't necessarily mean that someone her age has the capacity to understand the dangers that are out there in the world, especially from a small town. Investigators just know they have a lot of work ahead of them, There really is no easy way to go through everyone that she interacted with. I know it took me a whole day just to read a lot of these tweets and get an understanding of who Alexis was as a person, let alone trying to track down every single mention, every single retweet, and every single DM. And that is when investigators were working on it. To reiterate, just because someone posts sexy photos of themselves doesn't mean that they are responsible for someone else's actions or someone's perspective, the way that someone thinks when they're looking at said photos. But it does allow investigators to understand potential dangers that Alexis could have opened herself up to. Remember, criminals target certain individuals. It's easy to see when reading her tweets that she's looking for someone to love her, to make her feel special, to make her happy. So if someone can pose as all of those things, they could potentially work their way into her life and get close enough to hurt her. Her family doesn't want to see it that way. They talked about the fact that she was humble, that she didn't know she was beautiful, and that she was the type of girl who was loving, caring, and innocent. And I know someone can be all of those things and still be portraying something different on social media that can be taken as something else. We don't consider it real life until real life and social media collide. That's when it makes these experiences real. There's something else they make as a connection on her Twitter, but before I go into that, I want to go back to the other portion of this investigation that I told you was going on at the same time. We need to backtrack. As investigators are going through Alexis's Facebook messages, they find out she made plans with a guy in Lynchburg named Michael Hendricks on the night of August 3rd. They were supposed to meet up, and the two of them had been in contact for quite some time. From the content of the messages, the investigators concluded that they seemed really interested in one another, and that Alexis was eager to come see Michael. So they track Michael down. He claims Alexis never showed up. He said the last time that he talked to her was around 6 p.m. on the 3rd of August, but that she ghosted him after that. Very interesting. Well, they dig deeper, and Michael has a solid alibi for the past several days, so he's ruled out for the time being. Meanwhile, as Billy Mays is working on her Twitter account, agents are combing through each and every one of her posts to find out where Alexis spent her time. There are other investigators working on where Alexis hung out, and they pinpoint the McDonald's and the Liberty gas station as places that they need to look into and interview people who would frequent it, including the staff. It's also on her way to Lynchburg, so could she have stopped there before making her way out of town? That's their next focus. But first, on the evening of Thursday, August 8th, hundreds of people gathered to pray for her and her family in a candlelight vigil held at the football field of Nelson County High School. Everyone gathered around. They had candles in their hands, and they shared stories about Alexis. Of course, the media was there to capture everything. It started to rain, and people were just huddling under their umbrellas, continuing to sing, read scripture, and speak out loud to Alexis, saying things like, "Alexis, we love you. There are generations of love represented here, and we're gonna find you." There were also several church leaders in the crowd, encouraging everyone to hold on to their faith that Alexis would be found, and to draw strength from God, keep praying, and keep spreading the word about Alexis until somebody comes forward with information so that they could bring her home. Alexis's classmate, Ramona Bryant, passed out pink ribbons at the entrance to the field. Pink, as I said, was Alexis's favorite color, and they wore it to support her and keep her memory alive. The next morning, new information was posted on the Help Find Alexis Murphy Facebook page, and here's what they said they learned overnight. Investigators were pulling every surveillance camera along the Route 29 corridor, trying to find anything that may tell them where Alexis Murphy was and when. Her cell phone was still not active. Investigators had narrowed down a specific time frame for when her car was left at Carmike Cinemas. However, they did not release that to the media. If the search continues, officials say they will likely begin to expand their search outside of the state. They had already received tips from other states, but none of those have panned out to be anything. For now, investigators are still acting under the assumption that Alexis is in Virginia. Investigators acknowledged that they're not releasing a lot of information to the public, but they're asking everyone to please bear with them. They say they're making progress, and the case is moving in leaps and bounds. Every day, people also started passing around these posters, made by iHelpSaveTheNextGirl.com, a nonprofit organization formed in honor of Morgan Harrington. She was that 20-year-old Virginia Tech student I told you about who went missing after a concert in Charlottesville. Their motto is "Buddy up, stay together, stay safe." Morgan's abduction and murder prompted the beginning of Help Save the Next Girl. They exist to spread information and promote personal safety, and this organization was founded by Dan and Jill Harrington, Morgan's parents. Amanda Sinclair from Help Save the Next Girl made these posters for Alexis. They included the Help Find Alexis Murphy Facebook link, as well as a tip line and a description of Alexis.I. T also includes what she was wearing when she was last seen: a pink blouse and floral print, full-length spandex pants, brown boots, and she was carrying a dark and light-colored gray purse. Guess what? We're about to catch a glimpse of that. That's right, because while investigators were trying to pinpoint the places that Alexis may have gone on her way to Lynchburg, they ended up at that location I spoke about, the McDonald's and Liberty gas station. They decided to pull the surveillance video footage. This is when the case takes detectives in a totally new direction, because they finally catch a glimpse of Alexis Murphy. Employees at both the Liberty gas station and McDonald's knew who Alexis was. They knew her very well. She came in there every single day like many other teenagers. Not only would she come in to get something to eat or fill her car up with gas, but she hung out there. She was there for an extended period, socializing with other people. It was around 7 p.m. that the camera caught her. Her car is parked at one of the pumps, and she comes inside the store to pay for her gas. Everything seems pretty normal. She just seems to go right up to the counter, pay for the gas, and goes back to her vehicle to pump it. The last known activity from her phone is at 7:17 p.m., so they had this 17-minute window, and they were trying to figure out what happened during that time frame. They started interviewing the people who worked at both McDonald's and the Liberty gas station. People said she was happy that day. There was nothing out of the ordinary. She was smiling and being herself. But then, when her family checked out the footage, they had a different perspective on the way that they thought she looked. They said they thought she looked like she had a blank stare on her face, and that she looked very uncomfortable. But it's so hard to tell. We don't always portray exactly what we're feeling and thinking. We could be stressed. She could have been trying to get out of there as fast as possible to get to her hair appointment. You don't know you're being filmed. You're not really playing up to the camera. I know from what I've seen online, yes, she's always smiling and bubbly, but we're just catching her in a mundane act of paying for gasoline. But now they know where she was last seen. This is where they're going to concentrate. Not only that, they're going to pull all the surveillance footage from a week prior to her coming into the gas station, as well as a couple of hours into the night following that time that she was last seen. They're trying to pinpoint whether or not anyone suspicious was around, if she had any weird interactions, or if anyone stands out to them. There's also a car lot across the street, across Route 29, so they started looking through all of those cars as well, because they don't know, she could be anywhere. It's like she walked out of that gas station and disappeared. The investigators were playing this short portion of the video over and over again, probably hundreds of times, and finally, something stood out to them. It's almost like you need to look at something again and again for something very small to become something very big. When Alexis was coming into the store, a man held the door open for her as she walked inside. This is usually meant as a courtesy to help someone out, a nice little gesture, a little friendly assistance. But because this was the only real interaction between Alexis and anyone that they saw coming and going from the store in the footage, it stands out. They narrow their suspect pool down, and now they start to question the gas station cashier, the one that was there when Alexis was checking out. That clerk tells the detectives that there was some kind of conversation between Alexis and this man holding the door. According to this witness, it seemed like the two of them knew each other. But what's interesting is that this is a middle-aged man. This wasn't a young guy. This wasn't someone that Alexis would have gone to school with or hung out with on an ordinary day at Liberty gas station. He looked rough. He wasn't someone clean-cut, and he certainly didn't look like someone that she would be interested in talking to or hanging out with. He just didn't fit the profile of, let's say, someone that Alexis was going to the gas station to deliberately meet up with. The clerk adds something else. He said that this guy is familiar to him, that he comes in all the time. He recognizes him, especially by his distinctive vehicle. He drives a GMC Suburban with camo stripes on it. Now, way before you say, no, it's a Chevy Suburban, I have to correct you. GMC made a Suburban, which is now called a Yukon, back in the 80s and 90s. This is the vehicle, a GMC Suburban. This is what it looks like. It had a camouflage stripe going around the sides on the doors, very distinctive. Another thing this clerk said was that this man had a tattoo of Daffy Duck on his neck. That is something they definitely would not be able to miss. This is their #1 priority, to track this man down. So the police take screenshots from the surveillance video of both Alexis and this unidentified man who held the door open for her, and they start to go around to all the businesses in this area and start asking, have you seen this man? Do you know who he is? Because he frequents this area. They also did this in Charlottesville, because remember, that is where Alexis's dad's car was found abandoned. They actually get a hit. The place that they get this lead is none other than a local adult video store called Ultimate Bliss. An employee there says, oh yeah, I know who this guy is. He comes in all the time. The store manager goes ahead and gives investigators all of the security footage, and it turns out 45 minutes before the interaction with Alexis, this unidentified man was in that adult video store. Oh, and it was definitely him. They could see the tattoo and everything. He had stopped at the shop to get some adult movies. He got a couple of them that evening. The manager went through their transactions for that day, and they were able to give investigators a name, Randy Allen Taylor. Investigators immediately run Randy's name and get his last known address. You guys, it's only 1 mile from the Liberty gas station. It takes 4 minutes to get there. Now, if you've been here before, this is the part of the case where things start to speed up because they just pinpointed their prime suspect. They have nothing else to go on, so that's exactly who he is right now. And guess what road Randy lives off of? The 29. Investigator Mays is already heading toward that property, getting all the other agents' information so that they can meet him there. When he gets to where he thinks the property is supposed to be, he doesn't see anything. He's looking at what we're looking at on the screen. All it is just a bunch of tall grass and trees. He can't even see a driveway. He doesn't know where he's supposed to go. He finally steps right through all the brush and the grass, and he's able to see that there is a dirt driveway hidden behind all that. Lo and behold, there is the camouflage SUV. It matched the description from the clerk at the Liberty gas station. They also see that there's a broken down old camper on the property, as well as a building. But the building is an old abandoned home that nobody lives in. Investigator Mays said he felt like this was something you would see in a horror movie. But this is real life. He walks up and knocks on the camper door, and sure enough, Randy answers. Investigator Mays tells Randy why they're there. He says, I'm here about a missing girl. Her name is Alexis Murphy. She was last seen at the Liberty gas station, and he shows a picture of Alexis. Randy says he's never seen her before and that he wasn't at the Liberty gas station on August 3rd. He was basically acting like he had no idea what they were talking about. But Mays has a feeling that Randy is hiding something, because they know for a fact he was definitely at the Liberty gas station. So why would he lie about that? That's when Mays decides to confront him with the fact that they have him on video holding the door open for her. His demeanor changes, and he lets them know, okay, yes, I was at the gas station. Without even asking him another question, Randy just starts to talk, and he begins to tell the investigators a story about how he met Alexis. He says he met her probably about a year ago at a local car wash he was working at the time, and he had been smoking some weed. She came up to him and made a comment about something along the lines of, "That smells really good." So when he saw her at the gas station on August 3rd, yes, he recognized her, he knew who she was, but he didn't have anything to do with her disappearance. Well, the fact that they have the surveillance video plus Randy admitting to knowing Alexis gives Mays grounds to obtain a search warrant for the camper. This is when things are going to heat up, and I'm going to tell you, I was shocked by this next part. It just blew my mind. I couldn't believe the things that I was seeing and reading and hearing about. It was too much for me to take in. It was just one thing after another. Unbelievable. Something Detective Mays points out is that once you're 5 feet back off of Route 29 toward this guy's camper, you're in the shadows. No one would know that you're there. So they leave, come back with the warrant, and Randy is waiting for them in the driveway. He's not saying anything, he's just kinda standing there. They also noticed that there's a video camera on the top of his camper, which was a little weird, as well as a spotlight on the front of his vehicle. As soon as detectives step into that camper, something catches their eye, something shiny, and it's stuck inside the carpet. They kneel down, pick it up, and realize it is a diamond stud, one single diamond stud. As they're still looking around on their hands and knees, they locate a broken fingernail that is deeply embedded into the carpet. This place is a mess. There are things everywhere, and you can't really tell what's evidence or what is trash. But they make their way to Randy's bed, and one of the pillows has a long black hair attached to it. A root of that hair was still intact, and that means that it was pulled out of the scalp by force. It also means they can find out whose hair it was with DNA. This is not good. This is horrifying already, and I'm sure you are making the connections. But there will definitely be more, and there will also be a lot of confusing aspects to this case, and questions that will go unanswered for a long time. But let me get there. The investigators have seen enough at this point. They know how crucial it is that they get a DNA analysis done on what they have just found so far. So, they actually get in touch with Quantico, the federal FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia, and they let them know we need a DNA analysis rushed. The lab tells them, we can get it done in 48 hours, and that's fast. This stuff usually takes weeks, if not months. Meanwhile, the investigators leave Randy's property and head back to the Liberty gas station because they want to know if there are any other cameras on that building. They know in their minds Alexis was in that camper. Why? They have so many questions. Luckily, there is another camera, and from this other vantage point, you're not going to believe what they saw. Honestly, it still doesn't make sense to me, and there are a lot of theories about why they saw what they saw. They catch a glimpse of Randy's SUV on Route 29, going toward his property, and right behind his vehicle is the white Nissan Maxima, directly behind him, following him, going north toward Charlottesville, not Lynchburg. Why? Why was she following him? Was she driving that car? If she was driving that car, why in the world would she be following a 48-year-old man to his property? While investigators are still waiting on those DNA results, they search around Randy's entire property. There's just all kinds of garbage and trash, mountains of trash behind his camper. It's not easy to search through. There's really high grass, and there are all kinds of ticks in there, but investigators are determined. They even brought in special canines, which was fascinating. I had never heard about this before. These types of canines literally specialize in tracking the scent of a specific glue that's used in the manufacturing process of cell phones. How insane is that? Because that was critical, they wanted to find Alexis's cell phone, thinking that could provide a lot of evidence. Did she meet up with someone? Who was she talking to last? After they brought those canines in, within just about 30 minutes, they find her phone. It's literally 70 feet from where Randy's camper is located. Unbelievable. It's completely shattered too. It's broken, and it's obvious that the phone had been broken on purpose. It's been destroyed for the most part, but they can still send that in for forensic analysis. Honestly, finding that iPhone felt almost like closing the case for them, but it isn't closed yet. I'm going to tell you that right now. This is something they knew she would always have with her. It was her lifeline. Our phones are like part of us. We really don't go anywhere without them. They had enough to arrest Randy for abduction, and when they do, Randy acts as though he's completely thrown off guard. But it's pretty obvious that Alexis wasn't there, even though they don't have that DNA match yet. They just know. But Randy has a story for them. Another story. Listen to this. He says, "Okay, I didn't want to be involved, but you're right. Alexis was here, but she wasn't alone. She was with, as he put it, some black guy. He said that she and this guy came to his camper to smoke some weed, and that's what they did. They came over, bought some weed, and then they left. He said the last time he saw Alexis, she was completely fine. She left with this black guy with dreads. They asked if he had a name, and he actually does. He says that the guy's name is Damian Bradley. They're not really sure what to think about this because they know that Randy likes to tell stories. He likes to lie. They've already caught him in a lie. But they do go through Alexis's Facebook, and sure enough, one of her friends is a man named Damian Bradley, and he lives in Nelson County. It turns out he left town right after Alexis went missing, and now he's in Alabama. That's definitely a red flag. Could something have happened between Damien and Alexis after Randy was with them smoking weed in the camper? Did Randy leave and then they stayed? They need to know more. So they track down Damien Bradley. They find out he works at the local McDonald's that's attached to the Liberty gas station. And this is a pretty big deal because we know this is where she was right before she ended up at Randy's camper. So was Damien driving that car? Also, we know Alexis loves frappes and that she's always at McDonald's. Look, she even tweets pictures of McGriddles. Well, they do get to talk to Damien. They ask him about Alexis, and he says, "You know what? Yeah, we talked. We kind of had crushes on one another. She would come in and I would see her, but I never hung out with her outside of work." They're like, "Are you sure?" That's when they tell him the story that Randy gave about his version of what happened on August 3rd. He says that's a lie. That's all a lie. Is it though? Because after all, Damien definitely fits the profile of someone that Alexis would hang out with, someone she might have trusted, someone she knew since they talked each time they saw each other on a regular basis at McDonald's. And you might be wondering what Alexis's family thinks about all this. Well, they have their thoughts. It seems like any time weed was brought up, her family would make sure to mention that Alexis was a really good girl, that she was very responsible, that she was the typical innocent, sweet teenager. But that doesn't mean that she didn't like to smoke weed. However, I completely understand the stigma that existed and still does. As a matter of fact, a post was made on the Helpline Alexis Facebook page, and it addressed this entire topic since social media is accessible to everyone, and everyone was trying to help piece things together to help solve this puzzle. They saw pictures of Alexis smoking, and they were apparently victim blaming when no one knows the facts of this case. Alexis is not on trial. She is the victim. Whether or not she did or didn't smoke, remember that victimology and victim blaming are different. Saying things like smoking weed leads to associating with the wrong people, or she should have known better, is victim blaming. However, saying something like, she liked to smoke, and this pervert most likely used this to his advantage, is acknowledging how these criminals find ways to work their way into a potential victim's life. It's like offering kids candy. Here's the post that went up on Facebook regarding this. With all the comments being released from Randy Taylor today, I want to be clear about a few things. Alexis Murphy is not on trial here. She is the victim. Analyzing her Twitter and Facebook accounts to pass judgment on what kind of person you think she may be is really unfair since she's not here to defend herself. Our main focus should be to help bring Alexis home and to bring those involved in her disappearance to justice. Thank you all for your support and prayers. What is even more important to look at, and what didn't make sense, was, if she was going to an appointment all the way in Lynchburg, why in the world would she make this random stop to hang out with Damien, someone she supposedly had never hung out with before, right before she was supposed to leave town to meet up with another guy, Michael, that she was interested in and had actually made plans with? It just doesn't make sense. The timeline doesn't work for me. Plus, Damien has an alibi for August 3rd. He wasn't even at McDonald's or near the Liberty gas station. He was actually donating blood around the same time that Alexis would have been at the gas station. The whole story that Randy gave about how Damien supposedly left McDonald's while he was working to go buy or sell or smoke weed with a complete stranger really didn't make sense. That's right, Damien said he never met Randy. What detectives already know is that not only did Damien and Alexis spend a lot of time at the Liberty gas station and McDonald's, but so did Randy. That's probably where Randy saw Damien working behind the counter, and they now think that Randy's just trying to throw them off track. It's starting to look like they need to go back and look in Randy's direction. As the case becomes more widespread, other people start coming forward with tips, especially regarding Randy. One tip involves an Applebee's in Charlottesville. Someone comes forward with evidence that Randy came in on the night of August 4th around 11 p.m. He ordered a couple of beers and then left in a cab. Guess where this Applebee's was located? It was walking distance from the movie theater where the car that Alexis was driving had been found and seen on camera at 10:30. He left in a cab. What does that tell you? Well, circumstantially, it says he was the one driving that Nissan Maxima. When Alexis's Aunt Trina hears the name Randy Taylor and sees a picture of him, she's shocked because she realizes she knows who he is. He used to work at a used car lot, and she bought a car from him. Wow, I mean, it is a small town after all. But as people get word that Randy may be involved, more information starts to come out. Some people say they were very uncomfortable when they saw him at the gas station, that he would sit in his SUV just smoking and watching people for hours. Ugh. It's probably young girls that he was looking at, so gross. They do go ahead and collect a sample of DNA from Damien, just in case they want to eliminate him 100%, or just in case it turns out he really was in the camper. Speaking of DNA, you probably could have guessed this. The DNA results are back, and that was Alexis Murphy's strand of hair, the one that was found on Randy's pillow. What is going on? Well, investigators think they know. That's when they make a little unexpected drop-in back at Randy's, this time with the FBI. He definitely didn't think they were going to come back. He thought the search was over, so he hid something after they left. They end up finding the shirt that Randy was seen wearing in the Liberty gas station video. And get this, it was balled up underneath his couch. Wow, great hiding place, Randy. But I'm glad you suck at covering up evidence. When they unroll this balled up t-shirt, a track of hair extensions falls out along with 2 false eyelashes. But the worst part was all the blood. The shirt was covered in it. So unbelievable. At this point, authorities really want to up the charge from abduction to murder after everything they found. Through experience, they believe that, sadly, this is not a case where Alexis was taken and got away, or was released. The extensions were pulled from her scalp. They did not just fall out. The broken nail, the nose ring, all of those things had to come off Alexis in a struggle. The problem is Alexis's family is holding on to the hope that she will turn up. A murder charge solidifies their worst fear. She is dead. Plus, they haven't found a body. Usually we hear, no body, no crime. But that is not how the prosecutor saw things. There were cases that had been tried in Virginia without a body being discovered, like the Stephen Epperly case. However, the prosecutor would need to sit down with Alexis's family and tell them that he didn't think she was alive and that they would agree to charge Randy with murder. I mean, her items with her DNA were found at this random stranger's house. She hasn't made contact with her family, and her phone is completely smashed. We know that's her lifeline. Not only did she miss a date with a guy she had been planning to meet up with in Lynchburg that night, but she also missed a very important hair appointment for her senior photos. This wasn't like Alexis. They had to convince her family that she was dead, which was critical to get the family on board. This wasn't just a legal issue. They were worried about not getting the family on board. How are you going to charge someone with murder if the family is still adamant that she's alive? It was more about how this would affect the trial. If the family was still out there holding vigils and saying she was going to come back, then they wouldn't be convinced that Randy killed her. That built in doubt before the trial even started. If a jury thinks that Alexis's own family doesn't believe she's dead, why would they convict this man? They had to come up with a plan. They said, why not offer Randy a deal? Tell him if he can show us where the body is, we won't give him life in prison. We'll take that off the table and we'll give him 20 years. That was a really hard deal for them to make, but at the same time, I can understand that the most important thing is to bring Alexis home, dead or alive. So the family agrees, and they present this offer to Randy. You can't believe what he says. Give me 10 years, and I'll tell you where she is. He had been sitting there saying he was innocent, so why is he acting like he now knows where she is if he didn't kill her? There's so much more to this, so don't leave, because I want you to find out what happens next. Randy's trial was set for May 2014, and meanwhile, the search was still on. Evidence was still being collected from Randy's property. Remember that abandoned building? They go inside and find this weird scrapbook that truly gives them a glimpse into the wicked and perverted mind of Randy Taylor. There are all these cutouts of women with no clothes on, and their faces are cut out of the pictures, with another person's face pasted on top. Guess whose face it is? Not Alexis's, but the daughter of one of Randy's co-workers. He is sick. Still, Randy is steadfast in his innocence. Well, remember Samantha Clark? I briefly mentioned that she lived close to Charlottesville back in 2010. She was 19 and lived at home with her parents and little brother. She was home until midnight when she was apparently picked up by someone. Remember this, she told her brother she was going out and would be back the next morning. Just like Alexis's mom, Samantha's mom worked the night shift and didn't come back until the next morning. Samantha never returned. She left behind a pair of her pajamas on the bed and took her house key. She didn't have a cell phone, so they weren't able to track her. Guess what? She was friends with Randy Taylor. He was the prime suspect in her case, and investigators from her case had been in Lovingston this whole time, working to determine whether there were any connections between her case and Alexis's. Samantha had started to hang out with a new group of friends the week prior to her disappearance, and one of those new friends was the then 45-year-old Randy Taylor. It was said that he would throw parties and invite young people to come over to smoke and drink and hang out. Through phone records, Randy Taylor was the last person who had contact with Samantha Clark. He called Samantha's house 6 times the night that she went missing. He even admits that he was the last person to see her, but he claims he's not responsible for her going missing. Really? While all this is going on, the girls' volleyball team at Nelson County High School began their fall season without Alexis. They wore pink ribbons in their hair with her name and her jersey number. It was touching. It was a waiting game. May 1st, 2014 was the first day of Randy's trial, and still no Alexis. The search hasn't stopped. Facebook and other social media pages were still buzzing almost every day with info to keep Alexis on everyone's mind. The prosecution has a theory about what they think happened. They believe Randy enticed Alexis, just like he had done to other teens in the past, with the promise of selling her some weed. He may have shown her some, which is where he could have pulled in that line she said about how it smelled really good, like it was good quality. That type of thing could have happened that day, not a year ago at some car wash, because lies and the truth blend. His house was only 4 minutes away, and he could have used that to say, "You know what? It'll be really fast, I only live a mile away." They don't think anyone else was driving her car to his place, but they believed that once she arrived, she was either forced into his camper or she went in to retrieve the weed. Either way, they think he became physical with her and ultimately forced himself on her, ending her life in that altercation. They believe he kept her body there on Saturday until he figured out what to do next. Then, on Sunday night, he took her to wherever he hid her and drove her car to Charlottesville, dumping it in the movie theater parking lot before taking a cab back to his house. Alexis's family doesn't believe this version of events. They insist there's no way Alexis would have willingly driven out to his property. They think she was somehow forced there. During the opening argument, prosecutor Anthony Martin used the evidence they found to paint a gruesome picture of what transpired in that camper. The defense countered this by suggesting the police planted the hair extensions and other items to pin the crime on Randy, who was already the suspect in several other disappearances. During the opening argument, prosecutor Anthony Martin used the evidence they found to paint a gruesome picture of what transpired in that camper. Yes, there was no body, but Anthony Martin argued, let's not reward a person by not convicting them just because they did a good job hiding the body. I completely agree. After a 5-day trial, just a few hours passed in jury deliberations before 5 men and 7 women found Randy Taylor guilty. As the jury was walking out, Randy stood up and shouted, "I'll take the original deal of 20 years and tell you where she is." But it was too late. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. Yet he maintains he had nothing to do with Alexis's disappearance. But something else happens that makes prosecutors think they may have convicted the wrong guy. They suspect that Randy might have been telling the truth. Just 2 months later, police arrested a black man with dreadlocks. Recall Randy's description of the guy who he claimed came with Alexis to his camper? This man, Jesse Matthew, was a suspected serial killer linked to the cases of 2 other girls, Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington. Morgan went missing after a concert in 2009 in Charlottesville. Her skeletonized body was found a few months later on farmland 6 miles away from the concert venue. Hannah Graham went missing in 2014, shortly after Alexis. It turns out, Jesse admitted he was the one who killed Hannah. The last time her friends heard from her was in a text message around 1 a.m. on September 13, 2014. She told her friends she was on her way to a party in Charlottesville but got lost. She was never heard from again. Authorities pulled surveillance video and found that Hannah was at a restaurant called Tempo in Charlottesville with Jesse Matthew, who was 32 years old at the time. A witness at the restaurant reported seeing Jesse holding on to Hannah, who appeared to be very intoxicated. Another witness in the parking lot heard Hannah say, I'm not getting in the car with you. Jesse had already been accused of forcing himself on women at 2 separate colleges he attended in Virginia, Liberty University and Christopher Newport University. He left both schools after those allegations. They connected Jesse to Morgan Harrington through forensic evidence taken back in 2009, which matched Jesse Matthew. It turns out Jesse interacted with Morgan the night she went missing. Hannah and Morgan's remains were found only 5 miles apart. Jesse Matthew pleaded guilty to the murders of Morgan and Hannah, and now Randy's defense attorney wants the state to look into Jesse as the person really responsible for Alexis's disappearance. They ran Jesse's DNA against the evidence in Alexis's case and ruled him out, but Randy appealed his conviction, which was denied. However, the case doesn't end there. 7 years later, on December 3, 2020, a body was discovered on private property off Stage Bridge Road along Route 29 in Lovingston, Virginia. At the time, this location wasn't announced to the public, but it was only a 2-minute drive from Randy's property. It wasn't until 2 months later, on February 5, 2021, that they identified the body as belonging to Alexis Murphy. On the Help Find Alexis Murphy Facebook page, a post went up on February 18th, reading, "There are approximately 3,679,200 minutes in 7 years. Alexis has been missed. In each of them, we have spent grieving the unknown and her presence while simultaneously trying to continue to find joy in life. While in many ways we are just truly beginning to start the grieving process, we also realize this means we can begin celebrating who Alexis was and the incredible impact she had on each of us in life and in death." Alexis's family also released a statement about her. "Our family is so grateful for the continuing love, support, and prayers for Alexis and our family over the past 7 years. While we have been grieving the loss of Alexis since 2013, we remained hopeful that she would be found alive and well. Alexis was the fashionista, athlete, and joker of our family. We were blessed to have loved her for 17 years, and her memory will continue to live on through all of us. Our family would like to extend heartfelt thanks and sincere gratitude to the citizens of Nelson County, the FBI, the Virginia State Police, the Nelson County Sheriff's Office, and all the search and rescue teams for your commitment and unwavering support to find Alexis. You all kept the promise made in 2013 to bring Alexis home." The family added that during this difficult time for everyone, we should lift our family up in prayer and, in the words of Alexis, keep hope alive. A memorial service was held for Alexis on what would have been her 25th birthday. Her aunt Trina had this to say, "My niece was beautiful and humble. She was abducted from a small rural town in Virginia in the middle of the day with daylight still outside. I hope young people and their parents watching will be more cautious and more aware of their surroundings. Pay close attention to your children. You can never be too careful." It's true, this can happen to anyone. Please be careful. You never know who could be watching you or your innocent children. Imagine working in one of the biggest luxury department stores in the world. When you walk through the doors, you enter an oasis of perfume and makeup counters, shoes, clothing, handbags, home decor, food, wine, and jewelry on 7 floors. For one young woman, this was her dream job. She was completely in her element until one summer evening when her life was stolen in the blink of an eye. This is her story. It's one of those cases where it leaves you questioning so many things and asking why. But it also makes you ask yourself, what would I do? Like, what would you do if this was happening to you? And those, to me, are the scariest cases where you can't even imagine a way out. Today, I'm introducing you to the lovely Claire Marie Bernal. She was born on July 25th. Today, I'm introducing you to the lovely Claire Marie Bernal. She was born on July 25th, 1983, in Groomsbridge, which is a village on the border of Kent and East Sussex in England. Groomsbridge is straight out of a fairy tale. It has beautiful green pastures, rivers, and a population of only about 1,600 people. It's a 2-hour train ride from London, which means you're close enough to the city to take a day trip and go shopping. Claire's mom, Patricia Adams, who went by Tricia, was a chef, and her dad, Martin, was an executive who worked in finance and did a lot of business in London. Claire was the oldest of 3 children. She had two brothers, James, who was only 1 year younger, and Philip, who was a baby about 5 years younger than Claire. As the oldest child, Claire was responsible, and she was actually the glue that held her family together. Being the only daughter, she had a very close relationship and friendship with her mother and father. But unfortunately, when it came to the relationship between her parents, that one proved to be less solid as the years went by. When Claire was only 7, her parents got a divorce. However, Claire remained upbeat and positive throughout the entire process, and if she had been worried about the ways it might change their family dynamic, she never showed it. She maintained a close relationship with both her mom and dad, even though they moved to separate homes. Martin moved out to Orpington, which was a 30-minute drive away, and her mom, Tricia, settled into Royal Tunbridge Wells, just 5 minutes from where they had been living. It took a lot for Claire to open up as a child, but when she did, she was kind, loving, trusting, and soft-spoken. She was also quite creative and artistic. Once they moved and they were on their own with Tricia raising the children, Claire started watching her mom do her makeup every morning. By the time she was 12, Claire was experimenting with all kinds of different makeup looks herself. She even loved doing her mom's makeup and makeup on her friends when they had sleepovers. Claire attended St. Gregory's Catholic Comprehensive School and actually got a job working at a local store so she could fund her love for makeup. She would always love to purchase things when she had a little extra money. This is when she started to come out of her shell. She became best friends with a co-worker of hers named Adam Ward, and every time they hung out, they would talk for hours. There was no topic off limits. Claire was attentive, warm, and she never had anything bad to say about anyone, except maybe herself, because she did not recognize her own beauty. She felt like she needed to rely on makeup to boost her confidence, just like many high schoolers when they're coming into their own. But Claire was naturally beautiful on the inside, and it would shine outward. Even if she didn't notice her beauty, others certainly did. By the time Claire was 18, she was a stunning young woman with long, wavy, golden brown hair, flawless skin, thick, gorgeous lashes, and a beautiful smile. Her eyes stood out to me. Sometimes they actually looked gold in pictures. They were a unique hazel color, very beautiful. Of course, being a self-taught and very good makeup artist, her makeup always looked perfect. When she walked down the street with her friend Adam or her cousin Kristen, men's heads would literally turn to catch a glimpse of Claire as she passed by. However, Claire was still oblivious, which everyone thought was funny and endearing. Her focus was on others. She was dedicated to making sure everyone else felt comfortable, beautiful, and loved. That's why it was impossible not to like Claire. She went to West Kent College in Tunbridge, where she studied beauty therapy for 2 years. One of her professors, Angela Wheat, said Claire was a pleasure to teach. She kept her head down and worked hard. Claire achieved her diploma through the Business and Technology Education Council in 2001. In college, she met her friend Amanda, who actually nicknamed her Claire Bear. Amanda said Claire was sweet and good-natured, and they never had disagreements. This was probably because Claire was a bit of a people-pleaser, and she was also a tad stubborn. When she made up her mind, she put her foot down. There was no budging, especially when it came to her career goals. Claire wanted to do professional stage makeup. She dreamed of working on movie sets or in theater, and she practiced every day. She trained as a beauty consultant and theater makeup artist at Shepperton Studios. In 2003, she began sending out a bunch of emails and letters to various department stores, hoping to get more experience in consultation. These were like cold emails, kind of like cold calls, where you just cross your fingers and send messages to people you don't know but hope to connect with. Claire was fearless. She figured, sure, maybe these people don't know me yet, but maybe one of them will be so impressed. So, she contacted the biggest department store brands like MAC, Yves Saint Laurent, Estée Lauder, and Laura Mercier. She actually landed an interview with La Prairie at Harvey Nichols, which was everything to her. Even though I wasn't familiar with La Prairie at the time, it's a huge, well-known brand, a luxury skincare brand, famous for something called skin caviar. Harvey Nichols itself is world famous. It's a massive department store, one of the top 3 in London, along with Selfridges and Harrods. So Claire was understandably very nervous. It would be a dream come true to work in London for such prestigious companies. She convinced her friend Adam to ride with her on the train to Charing Cross Station and then to La Prairie for her interview. On the ride, Claire was going through pages and pages of her resume and notes, asking Adam to quiz her on her portfolio. She was so meticulous, going over it again and again until Adam finally said, "Listen, you're gonna nail it. You don't have to worry." And of course, she did. She got the job, and her friends and family never doubted her for a second. In the fall, Claire made the big move to London from Tunbridge Wells, which is about an hour away. Soon, she began working at Harvey Nichols, located in Knightsbridge, Westminster, in central London. I miss malls so much. This one is known for its 7 levels of shopping, with food and wine markets, cafes, bars, and private dining. I'm getting nostalgic. Malls were a staple of childhood for me, like many of you, I'm sure. On the ground floor of Harvey Nichols, there are dozens of display tables for skincare, cosmetics, and perfume, with brand-specific booths along the walls. Claire, along with 3 other women, was in charge of the La Prairie booth. It was common for well-to-do and wealthy women to come in, sit in the makeup chairs, get makeovers, and get shade matches. That was one of Claire's jobs, shade-matching shoppers and recommending the right products for them. She was very proud of her work and always looked the part, making sure her makeup was flawless. She was a walking billboard, fashionable, with her hair always in place. Her posture was immaculate, which I need to work on, and her voice was soft and almost musical. She was made for this job, and it was the perfect job for a 21-year-old. She and her co-workers worked half days, and then they spent the evenings going to parties and exploring London. Claire also did some promotional work at Selfridges, which is a rival department store. She did this to help pay her bills. She got really close with her La Prairie colleagues, especially Susan Cantes and Natalia Sarapanova. Susan was around Claire's age and worked part-time, while Natalia was a few years older than Claire. Claire thought of both of them as the older sisters she never had. She also looked up to some of her other La Prairie colleagues, including an older woman who had worked at Harvey Nichols for 13 years. Eventually, Claire, Susan, and Natalia got a flat together, or an apartment for those of us in the US, located in Dulwich Village. It was a safe neighborhood about a 40-minute train ride away from the mall. The area was cute and green, feeling like the countryside, and Claire felt right at home. She stayed very close with her mother, Tricia, who was now living with her boyfriend, Peter Warburton, still in Tunbridge Wells. She was also still close with her father. At this point, her 2 brothers were living with their father. However, Claire was so busy that sometimes those she was close to and loved felt a little further away. She didn't always have the time to talk to them or see them. For example, she wouldn't talk to her friend Adam for months at a time, but when they did see each other, it was as if no time had passed. I'm sure all of us have at least one friend like that. Claire got used to the party scene in London as well. She enjoyed being single and hanging out with her girlfriends. She was definitely a girl's girl, and while she gave some men a chance, she was really picky about anything long-term. At this point, she was just having fun casually dating. Then, a handsome guy named Michael Pesh started working as a security guard for Harvey Nichols in 2004, and he caught Claire's eye. He had sparkling blue eyes and a kind of cute, crooked grin. Eventually, Michael came up and started talking to Claire at her beauty counter. In late January 2005, he asked Claire out on a date, and she was honestly flattered. She called her mom right away, excitedly telling her she had met this handsome, shy, but very attentive man who was originally from Slovakia. He had previously been in the military for a while and had moved to the UK on a student visa. Now, he was a security guard at the front doors of Harvey Nichols. Claire told her mom that they had already been on 3 dates, and she described them. They got coffee, had deep conversations while walking in the park, and Claire thought he was well-traveled and fun to talk to. However, she wasn't sure she wanted to get serious with anyone. There was also the fact that Michael was 9 years older than Claire and had recently gone through a divorce. What do you personally think about age gaps? I just like hearing your thoughts. As Claire got to know him, she discovered that Michael, at 30 years old, was serious about getting into a committed relationship. Sometimes, you just know what you want. But to be fair, at this point, Claire thought he was much more into her than she was into him. Since she wasn't sure what she wanted and she didn't have her mind set on a long-term relationship, she wasn't sure how to proceed. Sometimes that's really hard because you're enjoying someone's company, but there's also this looming feeling that you don't want to lead them on if you're not thinking there's more there. But you're still having a good time and are into that moment. Claire respected her mother's opinion. When she showed Trisha a picture of Michael, Trisha immediately felt he wasn't right for her daughter. She thought he looked too old for Claire, and there was something about his eyes. It looked like he had been through a lot, perhaps seen some things in his younger years. It's true he was in the military, and they do say, don't judge a book by its cover. But in any case, this little fling didn't last long. Just 3 weeks later, on February 28th, Claire broke things off. She had pretty high expectations when it came to dating someone long-term, and she wanted to experience different men and have more casual connections to figure out what she was actually looking for in the long run, like most of us do before we settle down. In April 2005, Claire, Susan, and Natalia moved into another flat in Dulwich. It was a multi-story brick building, and life was really picking up. In July, Claire turned 22, and her mom took her on a 5-day birthday trip to Florence, Italy, where they attended music festivals. They got photos of the two of them drinking, dancing, laughing, and just having an overall great time together. Claire liked learning about new cultures, and she told her mom that she planned to learn Italian. Trisha was so proud of the woman Claire had become. She wasn't just Trisha's daughter, she was Trisha's best friend. It actually makes me sad knowing what's to come. That summer, Claire started seeing a new guy, and things were going pretty well. It was a whirlwind romance. She was getting coffee with him in Tunbridge Wells when she ran into her friend Isabella from St. Gregory's. Claire and Isabella caught up, and Claire told her she loved living in London and was thriving in a new relationship. She was clearly in the honeymoon phase, and even told Isabella that she could see herself marrying this one. Isabella was happy to hear that Claire had found someone who suited her, and that she was doing well. Claire usually worked the morning shift at Harvey Nichols, but on Tuesday, September 13th, she agreed to switch shifts with one of her roommates. It was an average closing shift. Claire stood at the La Prairie counter across from Victoria Daniels, who was working behind a different makeup counter. They watched as customers exited the store with their shopping bags. Around 7:45 p.m., Victoria waved at Claire, kind of pointing to her watch, as if to say, "There are only 15 minutes left before we're free." Claire nodded and beamed, knowing the shift was finally coming to an end. At that time, a few customers were walking through the beauty section, heading for the door that led out to Sloane Street. Another co-worker of Claire's, Helen Quinn, was packing up for the day as well. Victoria and Claire were smiling at one another, but those smiles would quickly fade. Before anyone could comprehend what was happening, the mall was in complete chaos. People were running, there were loud noises and screaming, and several witnesses called 999 to report that there had been a shooting. A shooting at Harvey Nichols was unreal. It was very unexpected. The dispatcher assigned the case to Detective Chief Inspector Colin Sutton of the Metropolitan Police Department. His first thought when he heard there was a shooting was to drive out to West London, as there had been recent shootings in Hampstead and Stonebridge Park estates. But when Sutton found out that the shooting was actually at Harvey Nichols, he was in awe. He wasn't expecting that, and he knew right away that this case would be all over the news. He reached out to Sergeants Dave and Mark Leitch, who are brothers, and asked them to meet him at the scene. Sutton was the first to arrive. He spoke to management and was informed that they believed there were 2 fatalities. 2 people were deceased. Sutton relayed this to the station, and the rest of the homicide department arrived not too long afterward. They were shocked that anyone could have gotten into Harvey Nichols armed. The victims were a male and a female. The detectives walked over to where the female victim was lying, right near the makeup counter. They saw a young woman lying face up with a large amount of blood pooling on the ceramic tiles around her head. She appeared to have been shot multiple times in the face, which was just horrific. The man was lying nearby, covered in blood, with his face and arms outstretched. There was a pistol on the ground nearby and bullet shells around his body. It appeared he had taken his own life with a shot to his right temple. The Harvey Nichols team confirmed that this was Michael Pesch, who had worked as a security guard on the ground floor. If anyone knew how to sneak in a gun, it would be him. But why had Michael killed himself and possibly this young girl? Was he jealous? Was he mentally unwell? Was he working alone? And how did he have access to a gun? Sutton learned from management that this was a murder-suicide between two employees who had dated and previously had issues. That's when they were informed that the female victim was Claire Bernal. Not knowing the backstory, Sutton began his investigation with a post-incident debriefing with all of his officers sitting at one of the makeup counters. He asked everyone to treat Claire's case as a standard homicide investigation, starting without any biases, as if they knew nothing and were going into this with a clean slate, pretty much just doing the police work and looking for clues. The head of security, Brian Lenahan, offered to give the Metropolitan Police a file from when he did his own investigation of Michael's previous behaviors, but Sutton decided not to look at this file yet. He wanted to conduct his own investigation first, without letting any information cloud his perspective. I think that could be smart, but we'll circle back to this. I can understand why they wanted to start from scratch, but I also think there's a lot of valuable information in what had already occurred between Michael and Claire. At that point, Sutton didn't know anything about Claire or her family, but what he did know was that they deserved justice. He spoke with the press and the store management while the other officers gathered forensic evidence. They found 6 bullet shells at the crime scene. From what they could tell, Claire had been wounded 4 times, and Michael only once. So there was a missing bullet. The CEO actually called Sutton and asked if he could open up the mall the very next day. He said that every minute Harvey Nichols was closed, they lost out on thousands of pounds. I understand business is business, but that's also pretty insensitive. Sutton insisted they needed to stay closed, especially as long as they couldn't find that 6th bullet. Can you imagine walking into one of the nicest stores in the world and stumbling upon a bullet that wouldn't fly? The CEO agreed they could take as much time as they needed. His reputation was on the line, and this investigation had to take precedence over business. Sutton was informed that Claire lived with 2 co-workers who worked part-time, Susan and Natalia, who was from Russia. Claire wasn't supposed to be at work that evening. She was scheduled for Tuesday morning shifts, and the staff said they knew Michael was aware of her schedule. She always had the same one. Sutton wondered how he found out that Claire was working a different shift at Harvey Nichols that night. That's when Sutton realized Michael might have figured out Claire's new address and checked her flat before going to Harvey Nichols. What if Natalia and Susan were at home in the middle of this murderous rampage? His stomach dropped, and he jumped in his car with Officer Tony McEwen. They raced over to see if Natalia and Susan were okay. When they arrived at Claire's new flat in East Dulwich, it was quiet. The sun was just going down, and people were finishing up dinner and watching TV in their homes. Sutton and McEwen knocked on Claire's door and tried to open it, but it was locked. If Michael had gotten inside through the front door, he probably would have left it unlocked behind him. But there was a possibility that he might have climbed through a window. The officers went back to their car and debated what they should do. Should they break the door down, or should they just wait? That's when they saw a woman walking by wearing a gym outfit and carrying a duffel bag. She was talking on the phone. They listened as she stopped outside the apartment and sat on a short brick wall in front. Sutton got out of the car, and that's when he overheard her speaking in Russian. He figured that this was probably Natalia. He interrupted her and asked what she was doing outside. Natalia said she couldn't get inside because she was waiting for one of her roommates, with whom she shared a key. Sutton asked her if she by chance was waiting for Claire Bernal. Natalia said yes, she was. I'm sure she was confused as to how these officers knew that. That's when they said they needed to break some terrible news to her. Claire had been killed. Natalia was, of course, upset and scared, but honestly, she wasn't shocked. She suspected Michael right away. She let the officers know that Michael was constantly hanging around Claire's makeup counter back in January. The two of them had gone on 3 dates around February, and that was it. However, this man was clingy. He demanded that Claire spend time with him every day. From what Natalia could tell, it was a very toxic relationship, mainly because of Michael. He was a toxic person who wouldn't take no for an answer. Natalia said she put her foot down and told Claire she didn't want Michael coming over. She didn't approve of him. But she told the officers that after that one day, he did come over again. That's when he and Claire had a falling out, and Claire kicked him out of their house. After that, Natalia said that Michael showed even more of his true colors. He texted and called Claire nonstop, followed her around, and acted like they were still in a relationship, even though they clearly were not. He professed his love to her, and would even tell her it was the anniversary of the day they met. That's pretty scary. Natalia told Sutton that Claire wasn't sure what to do, and Michael's stalking only got worse. They didn't understand why he would not leave her alone. Natalia said that he would follow Claire home from work and stand outside their flat, saying he wanted to apologize, telling Claire how much he loved her. Loved? This man had only been on 3 dates. That was it. Natalia explained how she and Susan defended Claire and told Michael to leave. He yelled and cursed at them, causing a scene outside. They were so scared and fed up with him that the 3 of them actually moved flats in April to get away from this man. She went on to explain that at that time, Michael was actually fired from Harvey Nichols and was under investigation by the Metropolitan Police. He had stopped stalking Claire in the summer, and Natalia figured he was in jail. So how the hell had he gotten out? Wow. A lot had transpired between the time Claire met Michael and her lying lifeless on the floor of the mall. How could this have happened if he had already gotten to a point where he was possibly in jail? This is what detectives needed to understand, and of course they wanted to know who Michael Pesch was. Sutton and McEwen found Michael's address and headed there next. It was a large flat at the end of the street in South Tottenham. It was a good 40 minutes away from Claire's, and a very different type of area, way more rundown. At this point, it was completely dark outside. The street wasn't well lit, but from what they could see, it was a house in pretty bad shape. The grass alone was 3 feet high. All the windows were either boarded up or broken, and the front door was left open. It looked like a drug house. If this was where Michael was living, they thought he was probably mixed up with some dangerous people. It took Sutton and McEwen a moment to build up the courage to actually go inside. They didn't have any probable cause to bring backup officers, but they did think someone or something inside might have information on where Michael got his gun. For all they knew, this house could have been filled with guns. Sutton pulled out a mini Maglite flashlight and didn't even knock. He just walked right into this creepy dark house after midnight. They found not 1, not 2, but 7 men asleep in that house. That was a pretty wild confrontation. I can't imagine being the officers or the men in this situation. Luckily, none of the men seemed to be armed. All of them were from Eastern Europe and were not fluent in English. Only one, a 6'8" guy named Jorg from Poland, knew enough English to be able to translate what the officers were saying and what the men would say back. He turned out to be a really nice guy and was super helpful. He explained that everyone living in that house was on a visa. They were doing building projects and trade work. Jorg said Michael used to be their 8th roommate. He was kind of the odd one out, though. He would sit alone in his bedroom, writing in a notebook while the other guys went out for drinks. He said that Michael actually seemed really sensitive and kind until the beginning of March. Then he would randomly explode with anger. So he moved out in late April, and they weren't sure what happened to him. Bajorek said he never thought that Michael would be a murderer. That was shocking to find out, but the detectives were still very early in this investigation. So it turned out Michael's old roommates were pretty regular guys from what it seemed. Sutton and McEwen were convinced that Michael was working alone, but they didn't have the whole story. While Sutton and McEwen investigated, 2 other officers visited Claire's dad, Martin, at his home in Kent to tell him and Claire's brothers that she was no longer alive. Every time I hear this, I can't imagine the heartbreak of finding out that kind of information. No one expects to hear that. Martin felt blindsided. He had never even heard of Michael. He didn't know Claire even had an ex-boyfriend. In his grief, he was angry that Tricia had kept this from him. But to be fair, Michael really wasn't Claire's boyfriend. There were a lot of wires being crossed right now, and lots of emotions involved. Martin was, of course, devastated. His little girl, his only daughter, who spent her life living for other people, had her murder put on display. It was made a spectacle, done right in public, and he didn't think she deserved this. At 2:30 that morning, the officers visited Tricia's house. She had spent the evening celebrating one of her friend's birthdays. She got home around midnight and had already gone to bed with her boyfriend Peter when they heard a loud banging at the front door. Peter got up and went downstairs. Tricia was straining to listen to this conversation. She was able to catch the words Metropolitan Police and Claire. And that's when she knew that her worst nightmare had come true. She rushed downstairs and asked, "How did it happen?" The officers responded that Claire had been shot. Tricia immediately said, "It was Michael, wasn't it?" They seemed taken aback but nodded. Why is it that no one was surprised, yet this wasn't prevented? It makes me so angry. Tricia just felt like time had slowed down. There were an infinite number of emotions and questions running through her mind and her heart. She couldn't make sense of any of this. She spent the rest of the night in total shock. She was too upset to talk to anyone. She was just buried in her grief and guilt. But by the next morning, on Wednesday, September 14th, the Metropolitan PD found that 6th bullet in the mall. It was lodged up in the ceiling. Now it was time for frightened co-workers and staff to be interviewed about what they witnessed the night before. Everyone wanted to help. Everyone who knew Claire adored her, and they couldn't believe that this was happening. Police talked with Claire's co-workers and learned the same thing that they had heard from Natalia. Claire and Michael had gone on just 3 dates before their relationship took a turn for the worse. According to one co-worker named Malin who worked in the jewelry department, Claire and Michael had an argument. They said that it was Michael who ended things, but he regretted it. When he tried to win Claire back, she didn't want to be with him. Michael became persistent and crossed many of Claire's boundaries, which led to mediation from the staff at Harvey Nichols. Michael was fired and banned from coming back to work, so it was obviously bad enough to warrant him not being able to work there anymore. Now it was time to talk to one of the last people to see Claire alive, Victoria Daniels, who was working right across from where Claire was the night she was shot. Based on Victoria's recollection, it seemed Michael had shot Claire before she even knew she was in danger. She explained it was an average closing shift. Victoria and Claire were smiling at each other as the last few patrons were finishing up their purchases and leaving the building. But then, all of a sudden, while Victoria was looking into Claire's smiling face, she saw a shadow behind Claire's booth. She could tell it was a man, and he was sneaking up behind the counter like he was a spy. Victoria was taken aback. She didn't have much time to process what was actually happening in that moment. She thought it was either a crazy customer trying to steal something, or Claire's new boyfriend trying to surprise her. But Claire kept smiling as Victoria saw this man take out a black pistol, aim it at the back of Claire's head, and pull the trigger. Victoria froze. She couldn't believe what she had just seen. She watched as Claire collapsed to the ground. Victoria wasn't even able to move. She was in total shock. She watched as this man quickly approached Claire where she had fallen behind the counter and fired several more shots at the floor. Victoria didn't see what happened next because she ran, but she heard 2 more shots ring out behind her. When she looked over her shoulder, she didn't see the man anymore. The rest of the store was in a total panic. Helen Quinn said she saw the first shot, but immediately dove to the floor before she saw the rest. covering her head. One witness thought the store was being robbed. Another witness, who was eating dinner on the lower level with her friends and future roommate, was interviewed. They said, "We had finished our meal and were walking out of the beauty hall towards Sloane Street when I heard a crack that sounded like a glass perfume bottle being dropped on the floor about 10 feet behind me. I was startled. I looked around, expecting to see people moving to clean it up. Then I heard what I think was 3 or 4 more bangs. We realized it was a gun. People started screaming, and my friend and I ducked behind one of the makeup counters. I then heard another bang, and we ran across the floor to the door, across the road, and into Kingsbridge Tube Station. The whole time feeling so exposed and thinking there was a shooter taking shots at shoppers in the store. We were in shock, and it didn't even cross our minds to call the police. We just hugged each other. We could still see people walking into the store. A few minutes later, the police turned up, so we crossed back over the road to give statements. They told us that there was no longer a threat. Now that was because we know that Michael took his life. From what detectives could gather from the scene and the interviews, it appeared as though Michael shot Claire 3 times in rapid succession and accidentally fired a shot into the ceiling as he attempted to take his own life. That is how that 6th bullet got lodged up there. On the same day, the 14th, detectives found the hotel where Michael had actually been camping out. Sutton, McEwen, and York headed to Earl's Court. This was about a 40-minute drive from South Tottenham, where Michael had previously been staying with his 7 roommates, but only a 20-minute drive from Claire's flat. In the hotel room, they didn't find any firearms, indicating that Michael only had that one gun. They couldn't figure out how he got it, though. Jorg found Michael's 40-page notebook that he always saw him writing in. He wrote in both English and Slovak. On one page, Michael had written down Claire's new address, so now it's confirmed he knew where she was living. And from what I have researched on stalking, unfortunately, moving doesn't usually work, especially with how easy it is to use websites to find basically anyone's address. On another page in the notebook, there were paragraphs in Slovak with the headings, "The Meaning of Life," "Ghosts," and "Prophets." Since Jorg was Polish, he could not really translate for the police. Michael had copied down poetry and even written his own poems. One said, "From our love, all that is left is a dried-up spring. Yet all we had to do was push away the stone that was blocking it. I have as many memories of you as there are in a forest of trees. You're my only love, so ring me, please." Interesting. Sutton was now realizing how obsessed Michael really was. I mean, if everything he knew was true, and Michael only went on 3 outings with Claire, this was overboard. It wasn't love, it wasn't anything normal or close to love. If he loved her, why would he take her life instead? It seemed like Michael was living in a fantasy world where Claire was his one and only true love, and that they had shared much more than they truly had. If Claire didn't want him back, that gave him a motive. Did Michael find out that she had a new boyfriend? Well, Claire and Michael's autopsies were being conducted, overseen by Officer Mark Leach. Originally, Claire and Michael were lying on 2 tables in the same room, which made Officer Leach feel sick to his stomach. He felt like it was unethical that Claire was still in this man's vicinity. I agree. If you ever wonder why I don't put killer spaces in my thumbnails next to their victims, that is why. I don't even want to look at their faces. I don't want to have to name the killers. But of course I have to tell you what happened. I just don't want them to be remembered. I wish I didn't even have to use their names. Dr. Vesna Jorovich conducted Claire's autopsy and discovered that she had been shot 4 times. The bullet to the back of her head would have ended her life immediately. Once on the table, Claire endured 3 bullets directly to her face, which is, of course, overkill. It is so clear that Michael wanted to take away her beauty. She had been struck below her eye, once on her left cheek, and once right near her chin. Michael's goal was to destroy Claire's face. He wanted to take away everything that made Claire who she was, especially her beauty and her love for makeup. The shots were so precise that the doctor determined Michael had to have been trained in how to shoot a gun. This made sense because we know he had a background in the military. As for what Michael's autopsy showed, He had an entrance wound to the right temple. His pathology results revealed a cocaine blood level of 0.25 milligrams per liter, which is a pretty high dose of cocaine, especially for someone who doesn't take it regularly. Now, I don't know if this was a regular thing for Michael, if he was in fact an addict, or if he knew he was going to do this that night and needed some cocaine courage. But cocaine is one of those drugs that I've come to despise. I mean, no drugs are good, especially with the rise in coke being laced with fentanyl. It's destroyed so many lives. Cocaine has varying levels of toxicity, and the lowest dose associated with fatalities is 0.1 milligrams per liter. So the cocaine in Michael's system was probably not enough to kill him, but it accentuates feelings of aggression, which could have affected Michael's state of mind. Detectives wondered, did he take it to follow through, or did he take the drugs and then decide to hurt Claire? After a few days, Sutton talked to Claire's mom to get her version of the story. Tricia said that after 3 weeks of dating, Michael became possessive. He didn't want Claire going out anymore or even being around her roommates. He would get upset if Claire was around her mother, and especially didn't like her talking to Natalia because he had somehow gotten it into his mind that Natalia and Claire were too close. He thought Natalia was actually a lesbian trying to get in between him and Claire, which wasn't the case at all. Michael wanted to spend every waking hour with Claire. He told her he loved her and asked, "Do you love me back?" He was trying to bait her into saying yes, which made Claire very uncomfortable. She was like, "Mom, what am I supposed to say to that?" Claire was still trying not to hurt Michael's feelings, but it was all too much. He even talked about his future plans for them together, and Claire didn't realize the extent of how toxic this man was being. But she knew she felt uncomfortable committing to a long-term relationship when they'd only been on 3 dates. She finally told her mom that she planned to distance herself from Michael in February. He had actually pre-planned a trip back to his home in Slovakia, where his mom and his ex-wife, Michaela, lived. It was a 3-week vacation, and Claire was actually glad for the breather when he was leaving. He asked Claire to come with him to Stansted Airport to see him off and say goodbye, which she did. To Michael, this must have seemed like everything was going great in their relationship because Claire sent him a note for Valentine's Day as well, thanking him for a nice month. She said she was thinking about him and missed him, which was true at the time, but that was also who she was, a kind and thoughtful person. However, she was on the fence about whether to pursue their connection in a more serious way. Michael's persistent texts and calls during his trip actually turned her off. The night before he left for Slovakia, he called to remind her to come pick him up when his flight arrived 3 weeks later at 5 o'clock in the morning. Considering they weren't officially a couple, Claire called her mom to complain about Michael's demand. It wasn't just a simple pickup. It was over an hour's ride out of her way. So, Tricia reminded Claire that she didn't have to do this. But Claire was unsure how Michael would react if she didn't meet up with him. Clearly, Claire was torn, but it was still kind of the beginning of their relationship. Eventually, Claire would start to see Michael for who he really was. She did go to the airport to pick him up, but she didn't call her mom for the rest of the day, which made Tricia worry. The next day, Claire called and said she had finally broken it off with Michael and that she was actually scared of him. At the airport, Michael had expected Claire to carry all of his extremely heavy luggage, burdening her with his things, and asked to go back to her flat because he was tired and didn't want to lug everything across London. That was kind of rude, plus it didn't make any sense. Michael's shared flat was closer to the airport than Claire's. Additionally, he wasn't welcome there. Remember, Natalia had explained to detectives that she and Susan didn't want him around. He had already acted strangely, so they told him he wasn't welcome. But Claire didn't want to cause issues with her friends. When Michael said he would only be there for a little while, she agreed. However, once they arrived at her place, Michael stayed the entire day and night. He would not leave. The next morning, Claire woke up barely having slept. She had been tossing and turning, socially drained and quite fed up. Claire told Tricia that she had to go with Michael to the train station, hoping he would get the message, She didn't want to flat out kick him out. But he seemed to think he was still welcome to stay at Claire's anytime he wanted. He even refused to take his suitcase with him to the station. When the train came, he wouldn't get on it. It was February and freezing outside, and Claire did not want to be there. When the second train came and Michael still did not get on, Claire decided to end things with him. Remember how the coworker Malin had said that Michael ended things? This changed the story. Detective Sutton wasn't sure who had broken it off, but it definitely happened during this fight, when Michael was supposed to go home, but wouldn't. This is when Claire told Michael he could pick up his suitcase another time, but wasn't welcome to come and hang out. At this point, she was done. She stood firm, begged him to get out of her sight, and walked home alone. When she got back, she put his suitcase out front and locked the door behind her. Minutes later, Michael showed up outside again, sitting on a wall and waiting. Both of Claire's roommates told him to leave. That's when he got aggressive, yelling at them and saying that all he wanted to do was apologize to Claire, claiming that Susan and Natalia were getting in the way of their relationship. He stayed for 2 hours before he finally left. Claire told Tricia she did not like him at all anymore. Who would? He was acting crazy and he was a grown man. I kind of wondered if he felt like he didn't have as much as Claire did, like he didn't have a nice place to live and was searching for a woman he could maybe take advantage of. When Claire wasn't having it, he couldn't handle that. He couldn't handle not getting his way. But either way, the next day they had to work together, which must have been awful for. Not only did Claire see Michael, but he also stood in line at the La Prairie counter among all the paying customers. Once he reached the counter, he apologized to Claire for lashing out at her and her friends. He blamed his behavior on issues he had when he went back home to Slovakia, claiming it brought up feelings of anger and resentment. But Claire didn't care. She decided to ignore him and go about her day at work. She was tired of interacting with this guy, knowing that doing so would only send mixed signals. That's when Michael roped their co-workers into the situation, further embarrassing Claire and making her feel like she was in the wrong for setting boundaries and distancing herself. Co-workers approached Claire throughout the day saying, "Michael just wanted to apologize. He just wants to be friends." This was so manipulative. Those co-workers had no idea what this man had been doing, and he was making it seem like he was the victim while Claire was being mean to him. She felt obligated to smooth things over, so she reluctantly agreed. "We can be friends, but nothing more." However, this only made things worse. After her shift, Michael followed her home with a big bouquet of flowers. Usually, flowers are something that women appreciate, and they're happy to receive beautiful flowers from a guy. But the underlying intentions behind Michael's gesture were toxic, making them unwanted. Claire told him, "I don't want your flowers," and asked him to leave her alone, but he insisted she had to take them. Just to prove a point, she took the flowers and left them outside on her doorstep, where they stayed, wilting away for a week. Claire hoped that he would get the message that she wasn't interested in his love bombing, and that she certainly wasn't interested in him. At work, Claire kept what was going on between her and Michael, and his stalking, secret. She loved her job and feared losing it. She was also in denial, unsure if Michael's behavior was truly bad or if she was just being ungrateful for rejecting his advances. She confided in her mother once again, but Tricia didn't know what to do either. Remember, I told you at the beginning of this video that this case will leave you questioning what you would have done. It may even be easy for you to believe you would know what to do, but just keep watching. Michael's obsession was alarming. He followed Claire on the train back to her house every day, waiting for her on the London Underground and sitting across from her. He texted and called her 40 to 50 times per day, but Claire left him unread. Still, he would not take her silence or no for an answer. Even at work, Claire couldn't catch a break. Instead of manning the front doors, Michael would leave his post and stand next to her beauty counter, pleading for her to take him back. She felt like she was always being watched. She couldn't sleep, wasn't eating right, and her health was suffering. She even began experiencing various ailments, like repeated eye infections. At times, she would catch glimpses of Michael watching her in the mirrors in the perfume section. That is terrifying. Throughout March, Claire never felt alone. It was exhausting and horrifying for her. On March 26th, Claire took the tube home, and Michael was sitting right across from her the entire ride. She sat there, ignoring him. He asked Claire to talk to him before he did something stupid, but Claire remained silent. When they reached London Bridge, she got out and asked him to please leave her alone. But he wouldn't let up, so she turned and ran away from him, hoping to lose him. Before she could get to the next carriage, Michael ran after her, pushing her hard. She managed to board the next carriage, but he caught up with her and sat right across from her again. At this point, Claire began to break down and cry. She couldn't take it anymore. Through her tears, she asked him to please leave her alone, and if he didn't, she was going to call the police. That's when he got right up in her face and said, "If you dare report me, I'm going to kill you." Wow, this escalated to him threatening violence and even her life. Claire didn't know what to do, so she told him, "If you leave me alone, I won't report you for a second." It was like something switched in him. He went from angry to gentle all of a sudden. He slowly reached out his hand and touched her face, then tried to kiss her. Of course, Claire pushed away. Michael apologized, and at that point, he actually did leave. But he stood right outside the window, tapping on the glass, waving, and publicly embarrassing her. Claire had a panic attack right then and there, and she called Natalia and then her mom, and she told them she wanted Michael gone from her life. She didn't know what to do. She wasn't sure if Michael would follow through with his threat to harm her. When Tricia was being interviewed after Claire's murder, she told Sutton that she was scared for her daughter's life. She knew that Michael was ex-military. They figured if Claire reported him to the police and they interviewed him and decided to let him go, he might find her and kill her. She couldn't risk telling Claire to go to the police when Claire's life was on the line. So many women feel the same way when people tell them, "Oh, you need to get a restraining order." Well, that puts your stalker on notice, and many times, it even agitates them more than it does prevent them from actually getting close to you. But Claire couldn't keep living like this. She was having nightmares and insomnia. Her eye infections were persistent, and the lack of sleep was causing her work performance to plummet. She was starting to get in trouble at work for making a bunch of mistakes. You might think, maybe just block Michael's number, or if they were on social media, you could block him on there as well. But she did block his number, and that didn't help. He always found another way to call her. That's another thing. We can block someone's number from showing up, but they can still text and they can still call, and then you'll have no record of what they were saying. You can't record any of it. You have no idea where their mindset is. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Claire even changed her phone number, and somehow Michael was always able to find the new one. When the threat in her life started coming up in his text messages, she made the leap and reached out to Brian, the Harvey Nichols' lead security officer. He convinced her to call the police. That's when Claire was interviewed by a woman named B.B. Shaw in the self-work hate crime unit. This is where police records filled in more of the story. Sutton was granted access to read through Claire's interviews that she gave with Shaw, and I'm going to read you some of Claire's statements in her own words. It makes me sad to know the pain she was going through and how trapped she felt. Claire explained, "Pretty soon into the relationship, I realized Michael seemed to be quite possessive. And because of that and the fact that I didn't feel like we were going anywhere, I ended our time together on February 28th, 2005. On that day, Michael became upset that our relationship had ended. I told him to get the train as all this occurred at the station. He didn't get on the train and instead followed me to my home address and sat outside the address for a period of roughly 2 hours. During this time, he kept calling me. I received roughly 20 missed calls, and he came to the door and spoke to one of my flatmates, being very rude and shouting at her, saying he wanted to talk to me. She said that I didn't want to talk to him. Remember, for 2 hours, he wouldn't give up. This is not normal. It doesn't show love. It shows disrespect of a woman's wishes. All too often, men will say, well, she was just playing hard to get, or a woman may think that a man being persistent means that he's just really into them. But this is not healthy. The very next day was the time that Michael followed her home with a giant bouquet of flowers. Again, one of those gestures, getting flowers, that most of us women would find charming, endearing, and romantic, but not after you've made it clear that you're not interested. In another statement, Claire wrote, "I've become increasingly worried and frightened by Michael's behavior towards me, both at work and outside work. At work, Michael has constantly approached my counter while on duty and pestered me to rekindle the relationship. I've often seen him nearby just staring at me, and on some occasions, I feel like he's using nearby mirrors to observe me. What do you do when someone is doing this and can't be reasoned with?" Claire also said, "Another time after February 28th, I was leaving work when Michael approached me in full security uniform and stopped me by placing his hands on my shoulders from behind. He said, 'I love you, and I know you love me too.' I said, 'No, I don't.' And he said, 'Yes, you do, you stupid little girl,' shouting it in the street. This all caused me to be distracted at work. This affected my sleeping pattern, and I haven't slept because I think he's waiting outside. I also had to change my phone number due to the amount of calls and texts he had sent." After reading these statements, they confirmed everything Tricia said and what Sutton had found out about Michael. Claire was terrified about him stalking her. He wasn't in love with her. He was getting off on any interaction they had, even the ones where he was rejected. In order to have control over her life, he kept going. Shaw was trained in domestic violence cases, but this was stalking, which is completely different. It relies more on emotional abuse. At this point in time, Michael had never injured Claire, so Shaw classified Claire's case as low risk. But she did take Claire's accusations pretty seriously. She worked closely with Harvey Nichols and brought Michael in for a 3-hour interview. It's no surprise this manipulative man told a very different story than Claire. Michael said he had ended the relationship by making her feel like it was over, whatever that means. He said he felt responsible for sabotaging a good thing that they had. And this makes me think Claire actually broke up with him. He's trying to compensate for his insecurities by saying he broke up with her, even if it was non-verbal, or perhaps in a moment of frustration. He might have just said, "You know what? I'm through with you," trying to see if this would change Claire's mind. But when it didn't work, he regretted it. In Michael's version, he said Claire told him that she had very strong feelings for him, and that she was confused because she'd fallen in love with him so quickly. What? We know this isn't true because she would have told her mom and her roommates. Michael said that's when he realized he made a big mistake and tried to get her back. But now she didn't want to be with him anymore, and that confused him. So he apologized over and over again. He said it wasn't stalking. However, he admitted to stalking behaviors, but didn't classify it as actual stalking. He said he was sorry she was upset and that he never meant to hurt her. This was all just a huge misunderstanding because of their language barrier. But here's the thing, that is total BS. He spoke English just fine. Michael was evaluated by a doctor who told Shaw that Michael had no psychiatric problems. He thought he was in love. He thought this behavior was normal. I have to think he might have been trying to control the narrative with the police and the doctor, the same way he tried to control Claire. Apparently, the authorities thought they didn't have enough evidence against him, so in early April, Michael was released on bail with no charges, and just given a warning that he would be arrested if he visited Claire or Harvey Nichols again. This was kind of like a verbal restraining order, and we know how well the written ones work. But Claire took his release as a sign she needed to move, and fast. That's when she and her roommate signed a new lease for a new flat. Literally the next day, and I'm not even exaggerating, he showed up at Claire's old flat while she and her roommates were packing up their things. He was standing outside, waving and smiling from the street as if nothing had happened. Claire called the police. She was angry and overwhelmed. She had gone through all this trouble of moving, and he was standing outside watching them. But when officers showed up, he was already gone. There was nothing they could do. On April 10th, Claire was all moved into her new flat, and Michael showed up again. She didn't understand how he got this new address, but she figured he most likely just waited outside her old flat and followed her or her roommates. And I mean, if this man is willing to stand outside her house for 2 hours, then he's probably willing to spend even more time just watching the girls to find out where they were moving. But this was proof Michael didn't take the law seriously. So Claire dialed 999, and this time he was still around when the police came. Michael smiled at Claire, and he was even holding up his handcuffed wrists together in the air for her to see as they were leading him away to a high-security prison. He saw this as fun. He wasn't fazed by it. Michael was charged with harassment and threatening to kill Claire. 8 days later, he got bail again. His hearing was finally scheduled for late August, and Michael planned to plead not guilty because, again, he didn't see anything wrong with what he was doing. Shaw had no idea that Michael had been released, and neither did Claire. Claire was scared to face him in court, and she told her mom that she was not looking forward to the hearing. But in the months between Michael's release and his trial, Claire never saw him, so she actually thought this nightmare was over, and I wish it was. Shaw explained to Sutton that in August she had no idea what Michael had been up to since April. Less than a month before Claire's murder, he stood trial at Tower Bridge Magistrates Court on August 31, 2005. His lawyer, Stefan Fiedler, convinced him at the last minute to plead guilty to the harassment charge. This would give the appearance that Michael acknowledged his mistake and he would get a plea deal. There was another purpose to this. You know, the threatening to kill charge? Well, that would be dropped, and Michael would only face a 6-month sentence with a higher probability of getting probation and community service. Claire was actually pretty elated that she wouldn't have to face him in court. He just had to reappear on the 21st of September for his sentencing. She wouldn't be responsible for putting him in jail for years, just a few months, to show him his actions were wrong. He needed to get the picture, and surely he would at this point, right? Claire truly didn't want to hurt Michael. She didn't want him to be angry about what she was doing. She just wanted her fears to be validated. She told her cousin Kristen, "Thank God it's all over," and she said to her mom, "Now, finally, people will believe me." And that's sad. Michael was given bail again during his sentencing. The court never expected him to violate his bail terms, and neither did Shaw. She was swamped at the time, working on over 25 domestic-related cases that year. In comparison to Michael's case, his didn't seem as violent. He had no previous convictions. He'd stayed away from Claire for 4 months. Claire herself did not consider Michael to be capable of murder. Stalking wasn't even considered a serious crime in London in 2005. With all that being said, Shaw and Claire thought Michael was low risk. He had done everything he could to gaslight Claire, to the point where Claire, Shaw, Tricia, and everyone else underestimated how capable he was of evil, clearly. And that is what is so scary about this situation and others like it. Sutton still did not know how Michael had come into possession of a gun while he was on bail. It shouldn't have been possible, so he started to dig into Michael's backstory. Michael Pesch was born on July 12, 1975 in Czechoslovakia, which ended up splitting into 2 countries in 1992, the Czech Republic, now Czechia, and Slovakia, where he lived. These are beautiful countries, but they were severely affected by the Cold War. Michael ended up going to military school and served in the army for 6 years. When he left, he got a job working for the American Embassy in Slovakia and got married. He and Michaela eventually got divorced, and then he moved to London on a student visa in 2003. The thing is, in 2004, Slovakia was incorporated into the European Union, which meant Michael was given the opportunity to stay in London for as long as he wanted, and you know the rest. After Michael was let go from Harvey Nichols and arrested twice, the police kind of lost track of him. However, Sutton was able to find out from Michael's passport that he actually left the country for Slovakia in April of 2005, even though he was on bail. How did Michael's passport make its way back to him? Investigators started to go down a rabbit hole to find out. In early May, Michael enrolled in a month-long target practice class back in his home country. On June 8th, he applied for a firearm permit with the Slovakian police. This included a background check and a letter from Michael's general practitioner. His doctor said he was of sound mind, and his background check didn't reveal any criminal convictions. But remember, he was only charged with harassment and threatening to kill. He wasn't convicted yet, so there was no formal record. He slipped through the cracks. After his firearm exam on June 14th, Michael waited to get his gun license in the mail. He legally bought a firearm in July. It was a Sasset 75 semi-automatic, a popular gun made in Czechia. It was compact and easy to conceal. This gun shot 9mm Luger bullets, which were the ones found at the crime scene. Even though Michael owned the gun legally in Slovakia, he wasn't allowed to have it in the UK. But Michael took a coach bus back to London on August 11th, hiding the pistol in his bag. Customs were supposed to check everyone coming through, especially if they were on bail. Somehow, he was never searched. Once more, this man slipped through the cracks. Michael knew to lay low until his hearing on August 31st. In the meantime, he planned out Claire's murder, knowing he was banned from Harvey Nichols, but also knowing Claire's schedule and which side doors were unguarded during the day. From his own experience as a security guard there, it was too easy. But I have to wonder why he waited until September 13th to commit the crime. Did he make up his mind to do it and then follow through under the influence of cocaine? Did he find out Claire was dating someone else? Maybe it was both. But clearly, he had practiced and purchased this gun to kill Claire. Her murder was premeditated, there's no doubt about that. Sutton was realizing that the system failed Claire, and Tricia knew it too. She demanded a trial into Claire's murder to see who had failed her and why. How broken was the law that her daughter was dead after reporting her killer to the police? Claire's funeral was held on Monday, September 26, 2005, and hundreds of people showed up at St. Augustine's Church for the service. Claire's name was spelled out in pink and white flowers, and Tricia made her first statement to the public. She talked about Claire's last smile to Victoria and her passion for makeup. Claire loved her job at Harvey Nichols, but recently, she decided it was time for her to move on. She actually had a job interview lined up for Friday, September 16th to be a receptionist at a PR company. That makes me so sad to know that she was doing everything she could to live, yet her life was cut short. Claire had even started to move her things into her father's house, where she thought she would feel safer and closer to her new boyfriend, who she was very much in love with and truly did plan to marry. Her murder devastated so many friends and family, not just because Claire was gone, but because no one saw it coming. That's because there weren't many people that Claire confided in about what she was going through. Even her best friend, Adam, didn't know about Michael. Claire was embarrassed, and she didn't like burdening other people with negative things. Many people close to Claire felt Michael deserved a lot more punishment than the quick death he received by taking his own life. But come on, this man was clearly a coward. Others close to Claire just wanted to put this tragedy behind them and honor her life more than anything else. Now, here's something I wanted to mention. It's about Claire's parents, Martin and Tricia. They had very polarizing reactions. Tricia felt the police had failed her daughter. She called for an inquest to question the integrity of the Metropolitan Police, the Crown Prosecution Service, and the UK's Revenue and Customs Department. She thought Michael should have been charged with putting people in fear of violence instead of harassment, which would have given him a 5-year sentence instead of 6 months. She argued that Michael was never properly assessed for risk, and if he had been classified as high risk, Claire would still be alive today. However, Claire's father, Martin, blamed his ex-wife Tricia for the negligence in Claire's case. He said she never took Claire's original complaints about Michael seriously. Martin said, "The two things that could have saved Claire's life would have been for her to leave her job and leave her flat. Neither of these actions were even taken or suggested by her mother." He also didn't feel the need to have an inquest. He wanted to put Claire's high-profile case to rest and allow her brothers James and Phil to properly grieve without dealing with the media. I understand where he's coming from. I also understand his anger with Tricia, but Claire was an adult. She did go to her mother multiple times. Even the authorities couldn't stop Michael, so how would Tricia have been able to? But I do understand Martin feeling betrayed that nobody came to him. Nobody told him that Claire was in danger. But Claire was fully responsible for telling her father if she wanted to. She was very close with both her parents, but they had different relationships with her, and Claire was afraid she wouldn't have been believed. She trusted the police, trusted that they would take care of it. Trisha trusted they would too. She's not to blame for her daughter's death. The only person responsible is Michael, and he's the monster. An inquest was done. It began in November of 2005 in Westminster's coroner's court. Trisha and Martin got into a fight in the witness box over whether the inquiry even needed to happen. Martin stressed again that the toll this case was taking on his sons, what they would have to be put through, and that it wasn't the police's fault that Michael was bailed. Patricia wanted something good to come out of this case. She wanted to be her daughter's voice. She needed to know what had gone wrong so other women who were stalked could stay safe from their perpetrators. B.B. Shaw testified that she had a high workload when she took on Claire's case, with only 1 day of domestic incident training and no training in stalking at all. She also testified that she had made a mistake. She never filled out a form called the 124D. This form is always supposed to be filled out at the start of an investigation because it helps in determining a person's risk as high or low. Michael was automatically classified as low because the form wasn't completed. So how is this not the police's fault? Shaw admitted that she deemed him low risk anyway because of his lack of convictions, so filling out the form wouldn't have changed anything. Shaw was inexperienced but did believe that Claire was scared. When she heard about the Harvey Nichols shooting, she called Claire. When Claire didn't pick up, Shaw knew Claire had been killed, and she did feel responsible. She even broke down in tears halfway through her testimony and had to take a break to collect herself. It makes me sad that she wasn't given the resources she needed to make an informed choice. You can only work with what you are given, and stalking wasn't even taken seriously back then. It still isn't, even here in the US. Natalia gave her opinion of what happened on March 26th when Michael had threatened to kill Claire on the tube. Natalia was drinking at a pub, and Claire actually called her. Claire said Michael had gotten on the tube with her after following her from work, and she told him to leave. Michael said, "If you dare report me, I will kill you." So, Natalia and her friend actually met up with Claire at the station. Claire told Natalia that Michael had just pushed her. So, not only was Trisha's story about Michael pushing Claire true, but Michael also pushed her right at the edge between the tunnel and the platform. Natalia said, "I don't think she realized the seriousness of the situation. Clara was a lovely girl, but she was extremely naive." So basically what they saw and thought was that he was trying to kill her in that moment. He was trying to push her to her death, essentially, and Claire wasn't seeing how serious this was at the time. Natalia told Claire she had to report him, and if Claire didn't do it, Natalia would. Claire thought if Michael got in trouble, she would be blamed, and she didn't want to waste the police's time if it wasn't serious. Well, guess what? Natalia knew it was serious, and she personally went to the head of security, Brian Lenahan. Good for her. Everyone deserves friends that are willing to put themselves out there for you. Susan testified that Michael liked to hang out at her makeup counter as well, talking about the breakup with Claire and feeling sorry for himself. At first, she didn't take him very seriously. She just thought, okay, he needs to get a grip. But over time, he started to intimidate her, and she felt like her life was in danger because she stood up to him, and she felt Claire was even in more danger of harm. The head of security, Brian, that I told you about, testified that when Natalia reported Claire's stalking, he started to pay really close attention to the CCTV footage. He watched Claire for half a day, and at every turn, Michael was there. He watched Michael lurking around the perfume department, looking at Claire through the mirrors, and he watched Michael harass Claire at her counter. So, Brian took action and moved Michael to an upper level, hoping that would work. But Michael also had access to the CCTV footage, and Brian caught him going down to Claire's floor right when she came into work and started bothering her again. He was obsessed, and he was unstoppable. So they suspended him from work on April 4th, with the caveat that he could no longer enter the store or contact the staff during his suspension. At this point, Claire did not intend to even contact the police. But Michael wasn't gone, because on April 6th, he was standing outside of Harvey Nichols all day, waiting for her to get off work. Brian knew then that they had to call the police. He recommended Claire make the call from his office, and she finally agreed. Harvey Nichols' upper management called Michael inside for a disciplinary hearing, where he was then fired. 2 officers arrested him in the store and escorted him out. Claire cried. She told Brian and her mom that Michael's expression of rage scared her, and she felt guilty. Even though Michael got himself into the situation, it turned out that Brian began his own investigation of Michael. He interviewed all the employees on the ground floor, and Mallon said that Michael was depressed about Claire rejecting him. A part-time employee, who was also going to school to be a lawyer, said Michael asked them what the maximum sentence for murder was in the UK. So even in March, he was planning on taking Claire's life. Brian looked at all of the text messages from Claire's phone, and there were thousands. Earlier on, Michael asked her questions, saying, "Why are you so cold to me? Is it because you're English?" This proved that Claire really was trying to create distance between them. Michael asked Claire to forgive him and repeatedly professed his love. Easter was on March 27, 2005. At that time, things escalated. Michael was acting like they were together, and he said, "Hey, it's our anniversary tomorrow. How should we spend it?" He threatened to take his own life if Claire didn't take him back, which is emotional manipulation 101. Days before Claire reported him to the police, he texted her with, "If I can't have you, nobody else will." Claire made up her mind that this was a threat, in physical writing, and it proved that her fears were real. The police would have to believe her. Brian testified. This file was offered to Sutton, remember that? But they initially declined to look at it due to investigative procedures. Brian remembered feeling frustrated by this. Relying on Claire's testimony alone was not enough to reveal everything that had been going on. The fact that Michael asked around about the maximum sentence for murder proves that he was a huge danger to Claire and could have been stopped sooner. Claire's support from the Harvey Nichols staff proves how strong her case was, and the courts letting Michael off on bail was wrong. However, on Thursday, August 9, 2006, it was ruled that Shaw and the courts were bogged down by too much paperwork and complex procedures, and that the justice system was not to blame for Claire's death. No one was to blame. As a matter of fact, the court said that Shaw should get an award for a thorough investigation, and Claire's death could not have been foreseen. What do you think of that? Tricia definitely wasn't happy with the outcome. It was a failure of the justice system that he was released on bail so many times and allowed out of the country. The inquest didn't give her the justice that she deserved, but Tricia found that justice herself. She worked with 2 other moms of women who had been killed by their stalkers to create an organization called Protection Against Stalking and assist the National Stalking Helpline. She works for the AAFDA, which stands for Advocacy After Fatal Domestic Abuse, and the family justice system to train police officers on proper protocol for handling stalking cases and determining risk factors. She convinced the Prime Minister to label stalking an official criminal offense. Because of Tricia's advocacy work, if you live in the UK and are being stalked, providing proof of fear can lead to a maximum 10-year sentence. Tricia's actions to make the justice system more effective actually earned her a Member of the British Empire Honour Award in 2021. It's just sad that women had to die to make this happen. None of this will bring Claire back, and there will always be a void in Tricia's life where Claire was. Her work ensures that other people in this world do not have to face the same fears and doubts that her daughter did. Her brothers, James and Phil, now have their own families, and Tricia and Martin are grandparents. Claire's case has also been featured dozens of times, and it's because of the importance of stalking awareness. Stalking can happen anywhere, even in a world-class department store, right in the public's eye. And it's serious. It's more prone to happen now because we're spending so much time on the internet. So, please be careful. I know you may be thinking what I thought throughout this case. What would I do if this was happening to me? And the scary thing is, we don't know someone until we do. So sometimes there is no way to tell that someone will end up becoming dangerous. I'd recommend, at the bare minimum, conducting a background check, even if someone seems nice. And never feel guilty for setting boundaries and standing up to people who make you feel scared or uncomfortable. Stalkers get satisfaction by having interactions with you, so do everything in your power to remove yourself from their reach, whether that means blocking all attempts they make to contact you, or getting a restraining order if you can. Do whatever you can. Claire's story is very scary and heartbreaking. She did everything right. She truly did. She even went so far as to get the authorities involved. She was still killed, but no matter how hard her killer tried to erase her memory, he will never succeed, because she will live on with all of you. It happened in a small seaside town in Southern California. It happened to a vibrant, beautiful, and very well-known mother of 2 young boys. It happened in her own home without warning. Lives were ripped apart with no solid suspects until 40 years later. Today's case is another really heartbreaking one. Today I'm taking you to Los Angeles, California, specifically Southern California, to a beach town called Hermosa Beach. It's small, but it's not that small. The population was about 177,000 people back in the 1970s, but it really is a very close-knit coastal community. Not only that, it's more of an affluent community. The coastline in the South Bay includes places like Hermosa Beach and Manhattan Beach, which you've probably heard of before, because there are a lot of celebrities that live on the Strand. It's a beautiful stretch of beaches, where the houses are literally hugging the sand of the shoreline. These are multi-million-dollar homes along the Strand. Lots of people enjoy running, walking, biking, etc. down these beautiful sidewalks. Hermosa Beach doesn't really look that different today than it did back in the 70s, which is the time frame we're going to be talking about. And this case is absolutely incredible. It was unsolved for 4 decades. In order to make our way to Hermosa Beach, California, we have to start with a love story. And that love story started out as a friendship between a small-town girl from Jackson County, Missouri, and an aspiring singer-songwriter from Santa Ana, California. Let me introduce you to Karen Sue O'Grady. She was born April 22, 1943, in Jackson County, Missouri. Karen's childhood was not easy. Her mom and dad did not get along, and her father would get physical. When she was just a young child, he decided to leave her, her brother, her sister, and her mom to fend for themselves. It was really hard on her mother, trying to make ends meet all by herself with the kids. Sadly, over the years, things did not go well for Karen's siblings. Her brother ended up in prison, and her sister ended up in a psychiatric ward. But somehow, Karen overcame the struggles that she went through as a child, and she and her mom moved to Santa Ana, California, where she attended high school at Santa Ana High School. That is where and when she became best friends with a guy named William Thomas Medley. He went by Bill. Bill Medley was born September 19, 1940, in Santa Ana, California, to Arnold and Irma Medley. His mother and father were both in the music industry. His mom was a singer, and his father was a musician, and they had a swing band together. They were always introducing their son to music, starting at a very young age. Bill's parents were Presbyterian, and he regularly attended church, where he sang in the choir. Bill had a natural talent for singing, and his interest in music just kept growing and growing. By the time he was in high school, he already knew that he wanted to pursue a career in the music industry. Bill and Karen both attended Santa Ana High School and the church. Soon the stars collided, and they began a friendship, which did not turn romantic at the time, but it did blossom into a very deep friendship. Bill called Karen his best friend. Bill dreamed of being a singer-songwriter. He was way more interested in music than he was in school, so he decided to drop out of high school to see if the music thing could be more than just a hobby. Karen was 3 years younger, so she continued attending Santa Ana High School. Karen and Bill were living 2 completely different lifestyles, and by 19 years old, Bill was writing songs for bands and vocal groups out of his living room with his best friend, Don Fucci. Two of Bill's songs were recorded by the Diamonds, Woman Ling and Chimes of My Heart. But Bill dreamed of having his own successful singing group, so he and his best friend Don, who played the guitar, started playing music together, and they called themselves the Romancers. They gave it a go, and by 1960, nothing really stuck. Bill, being determined to make it big, tried again. He and Don decided to recruit a few other musicians, Sal Fulo, Nick Toro, and later Mike Ryder and Barry Riera. Now they had someone playing drums, bass, and other instruments to add to their sound, and they became known as the Paramore, and they were good. They actually ended up getting signed to a label called Smash Records, which was owned by a bigger company called Mercury Records. So, they were making it, and they released 2 hit songs, That's the Way We Love and Miss Social Climber, in 1961. Even though this seemed to be exactly what Bill dreamed of, there was just something missing. One of his bandmates, Barry, told him about a guy named Bobby Hatfield. Barry thought that Bill and Bobby would sound amazing together, so he told both of them they needed to check each other out, and this is when things came together for Bill. Initially, in 1962, the Paramore basically just asked Bobby to join their band, and he did. They released a single called There She Goes, She's Walking Away in December 1962 through an independent record label called Moonglow. But the band just wasn't feeling it. They didn't really like the new setup, and they broke up, leaving Bobby and Bill trying to decide what the heck they should do. Both of them were extremely talented singers, with Bill being an amazing songwriter. So instead of quitting, the two guys just said, "F it, we'll just sing together, just the two of us." In 1963, they began booking shows at venues without a name. They were just going by Bobby Hatfield and Bill Medley, until one night they were performing for a group of Marines. Back then, when something was cool, people would say, "That's righteous." Well, after a show one night, one of the Marines yelled out to them, "Hey, that was righteous, brothers." And that really stuck with Bill and Bobby, because it was at that moment they felt like what they were doing was right. It was working, people liked it. They finally signed a deal with a recording label, but they realized they still didn't have a name. They really didn't think Billy and Bobby sounded right, and that's when they remembered that night at the venue. They decided to call themselves the Righteous Brothers. They went on to become a very famous duo. In 1965, they had their first #1 hit, You've Lost That Lovin' Feeling. And I'm sure you've heard it, or at least one of their songs. They're still played in commercials and movies. Bill Medley also worked on another iconic Patrick Swayze film. The Dirty Dancing theme song, I've Had the Time of My Life, was performed by Bill Medley and Jennifer Warnes, and they earned a Grammy Award. The Righteous Brothers would perform at various R&B clubs all over California and beyond, and women definitely went crazy over them. There was no lack of women throwing themselves at these men. Bill was definitely a ladies' man, and one night, while he was performing, he noticed this gorgeous woman in the crowd. He said out of all the people standing in the audience, he could just see her smiling face, and that's when he was like, "Wait a minute, I recognize her. Wow, that's Karen." It was his best friend from back in high school. She was graduated now and all grown up. So after he was done singing, he ran over to Karen and said hello. By the end of the night, he had gotten her phone number and asked her out on a date. She was 20, and Bill was 23. Well, they fell in love. It was like they were meant to be together, best friends that turned into lovers. Just a few months later, in 1964, the couple got married. Karen O'Grady became Karen Medley, and just under 2 years later, in 1965, they welcomed their son, Darren Medley, into the world. They were such a beautiful little family. I love this picture of them. To me, they look like royalty. They're just gorgeous, well-dressed, everything is perfect. It's like not one hair is out of place. Karen was thrown into this new world. She was basically famous overnight. The Righteous Brothers had gained an incredible amount of popularity, and this is not an easy life, especially not for a new mom who's staying at home with a baby while her husband performs at nightclubs and different venues all the time. Bill wasn't faithful to Karen, and that really ruined their magic. Bill admitted that he was having an affair with the singer Darlene Love. What made it worse was that he told Karen he fell in love with Darlene and couldn't help it. That caused a lot of pain for Karen. It hurt her deeply. She tried to stick it out, but by the time Darren was 5, Karen asked for a divorce. She still loved Bill. They still considered each other best friends, but Karen had enough. By the end of the relationship, both of them were already seeing other people. And it's sad, cheating can just shatter everything you tried so hard to build. Bill still loved Karen and wanted to be with her, but she decided to leave. That same year, Bill got married. Yep, to a woman named Susie Robertson, not the one he was cheating with. And while he was still married, y'all, Bill's dating another woman, Janice Gorham, and guess what? He tries to marry her too. I don't know what he was thinking. Bill, what are you doing? Well, I know what he's not doing. Being a husband, because both of the women found out, and both of the marriages were annulled. He once again tries to get back with Karen, but by now she's already engaged to Gerald Class and she's pregnant with her second child, who she would give birth to in 1971. His name is Damon Class. Unfortunately, the marriage to Jerry didn't work out. Karen became a single mom of 2 young boys living in Hermosa Beach, California, and going through her second divorce. Bill had moved about 40 minutes away to Newport Beach, California, and he was co-parenting Darren with Karen. The pair remained very close despite the painful divorce they had gone through earlier. They would talk on a regular basis, and Bill was very involved in his son's life as much as he could be, between juggling his music career, which was still going strong. In 1969, Bill performed Hey Jude at the Grammy Awards, and one of his recordings, Freedom and Fear, was nominated for a Grammy in 1972. Both Karen and Bill were very hopeful about their futures. Karen had really settled into her new routine in her quaint little house at 535 24th Place in Hermosa Beach. Here's the home right here, on this quiet little street, with houses that are very close together. This meant you got to know your neighbors pretty well, especially back when people actually used to talk to one another and welcome you into the neighborhood. Karen had a very busy social life. Everyone was charmed by her infectious smile and her laid-back personality. She was gorgeous, kind, good-hearted, and she was a great mother. She quickly made friends with 2 of her neighbors. One was Noel Castle, who lived right here to the right of Karen. Their homes were so close that their fences were actually connected, and they could just look over into each other's windows. The 2 of them became very close friends. They had a routine together with one other neighbor named Sue Kraft. The 3 of them would have coffee almost every morning after they dropped their kids off at school. By 1976, Darren was 10 and Damien was 4. Darren was in elementary school, and Damien attended the infamous McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach. The McMartin Preschool became one of the most notorious schools in the world in the 80s, and this notoriety was due to allegations of satanic rituals allegedly occurring at the school. There's way too much to dive into about that, and I'm sure there are plenty of videos here on YouTube you can watch. The only connection right now is that Karen's son attended before the allegations were made. There are so many other details and connections to other cases, like the Phil Spector connection. He was sent to prison for killing actress Lana Clarkson, and was also a very famous music producer who produced songs for the Righteous Brothers. But back to Karen, I just saw those connections and thought they were interesting. Back to Karen. She was living and thriving in Hermosa Beach. Karen spent a lot of her time here. She had a boyfriend in 1976, and I'm sure they came down here to the boardwalk. You also have the Hermosa Beach Pier, and of course, the absolutely gorgeous beach. Even though this town is small, there's a lot to do in Hermosa Beach. It is a prime location to live, and it's actually very family-oriented as well, from everything I know about Hermosa Beach. This is 24th Place, the little street where a brutal, heartbreaking crime is about to occur. One that stumped investigators and forensic teams for years and years. This is in front of Karen's house. It's still there. It's exactly the same house. And this right here next to it is Noel's house. You can see just how close these 2 homes are. You can also tell how small this street is. Now that you have a feel for the area Karen lived in, you can imagine her and her children walking the streets, her and her friends getting coffee and hanging out. hanging out with the kids in the yard or driveway. It was January 1976. She and Darren were out in the driveway, playing around on his skateboard, when something happened. Karen flies off the skateboard and falls really hard on one of her legs. She ends up getting taken to the emergency room, and it turns out she actually broke her leg. Ow, that would be very painful. It's hard enough managing two young boys who are only 10 and 4, but now she's on crutches. She has to do her very best to still get around. And she does. She continues to take her boys to school every day and meet the ladies for breakfast every morning as usual. Until January 30th, when she doesn't show up. Early that Friday morning, Karen took Damien to McMartin Preschool before 9 a.m. It's only a 5-minute drive to the school. It was Bill's weekend with Darren, so Darren was already with him that day. Karen was supposed to meet Sue and Noel for breakfast soon after dropping Damien off, but she was a no-show, which was very unusual for her. Her friends were worried, not just because she didn't show up. This was not typical of Karen, but also because she was on crutches, having trouble getting around. So of course, if you're her friend, you're going to be more concerned. Maybe something happened, like she fell before getting to where they were going for breakfast. One of the women had seen Karen pulling back into her driveway after dropping Damien off, and that was around 9 a.m., so it did seem a little odd that she didn't meet up with them, but maybe she was just running late. They called her, but there was no answer. Since they were her next-door neighbors, they decided to walk over and see what was going on with Karen. They went straight to the back of her house because that's where a sliding glass door was located, and that's where Karen had been coming in and out of her house. It was easier for her to use that sliding door once she pulled into the driveway instead of trying to navigate the landscape towards the front of the house on crutches. As the two women got closer to the sliding glass door, they noticed it was open. Now, it wasn't uncommon for Karen to leave it unlocked, but it being completely open was a different story. When they looked beyond the glass door, they saw Karen's crutches on the ground inside. At first, their thought was, okay, that means she's home. They also saw some cookies on the countertop, but no Karen. They called her name several times, and she didn't answer. However, they thought they heard something, so they got quiet and listened. It sounded like Karen was moaning. At this point, they weren't really sure what to think. They decided to go around to the front door and knock like respectable neighbors, not just barge in. After all, she had a boyfriend. They didn't know what they were hearing, and they didn't know what to expect. But then something very unusual happened. When they got to the front door and were about to knock, they were shocked to see a man coming out of the door towards them. It was a man they had never seen before. They looked at each other, both thinking, what is going on? The man came out and said, "Hey ladies," and just kept walking right past them. He didn't say anything else. They were just standing there. Who was that? Because it wasn't Karen's boyfriend. So they're thinking, wait a minute, what is going on here? I mean, okay, maybe they didn't know all of Karen's business, but this seemed kind of odd. They could also still kind of faintly hear some kind of moaning or some noise coming from inside the house, and they were pretty freaked out at this point. So they decided to go to a neighbor's house. He was a firefighter, and they knew he also had a gun. They were that scared, so they wanted to make sure somebody could accompany them, someone who could protect them. The firefighter decides that they need to call 911. The dispatcher sends out firefighters, paramedics, and police to Karen's house. In these small towns, they send everyone out there. That is not unusual. You call 911, you're getting everybody. It's like they really don't have that much to do in a small town like this. The very first thing that police noticed when they got on the scene was that it kind of looked as though there had been a robbery, like the house had been burglarized because it was in complete disarray. Things were overturned, there were drawers taken out and rummaged through, and there were so many things out of place. But as they made their way towards Karen's bedroom, that is when they saw her. She was lying on the floor completely naked, and they could see that there was something tied around her neck. She was also tied up. As the paramedics rushed in to assist Karen, they realized that she had been severely beaten, but she was still breathing. albeit barely breathing, barely alive at this point. When they got closer, they could tell that it was a pair of pantyhose around her neck. One of the pantyhose legs was tied tightly around her throat, and there was also a bra strap around it as well. It looked like the other leg of the pantyhose was used to bind her hands and legs together so she couldn't move. Unbelievably, Karen was conscious at this time, and she was barely hanging on. They immediately rushed her to the hospital. Meanwhile, they started to put up the crime scene tape, and crime scene technicians were now on the scene. One of them was Bonnie Clark Johnson, a crime scene investigator. She was one of the first there to assess the scene, and it was obvious to her, with her expertise and experience, that this had been an event involving forced intercourse. It definitely looked like a struggle had taken place, and Bonnie noticed there was a towel that had fresh bodily fluids on it, so she took inventory of that. She also found a bra near where Karen was lying, and it had been cut off of her. It wasn't just unlatched, it was actually cut off. They also collected the nylon pantyhose and all of Karen's clothing. At the hospital, they took samples of bodily fluid, including some that was on and around Karen's body. No one could believe that this was going on in Hermosa Beach. This had been, and still is, considered a very safe area. The kind of crimes that happen in this area are simple break-ins, or maybe somebody stole someone's beach cruiser, something like that, but not something like this, and not to a person like Karen. It seemed so senseless and unbelievable. Now, the most important thing was for them to interview Sue and Noel, because they were the ones who saw that man coming out of Karen's house. They also knew Karen very well. They knew everybody she was usually associated with. The first thing they said was that they did not know who this man was. They did not recognize him. But they did want to give a description to the police so that they could start to canvass the neighborhood, asking neighbors, "Have you seen someone who matches this person's description? Is it a person who lived in this area?" They wanted to act fast because this man could still be walking around. The women described the man as about 5 feet 7 inches to 5 feet 9 inches, with dark hair and a beard but no mustache. His hair was kind of scraggly, like it was hanging a little bit in his face. They thought he was probably 160 pounds or so. He wasn't a big guy. He also didn't look scary or creepy. He was most likely in his 20s, and according to the women, he just looked like an ordinary guy. The only thing that made them afraid was the fact that they did not know who he was or what he was doing in Karen's house. After they got the description, the police officers were on foot, going door to door. Here's the neighborhood. These homes, as you have seen, are very close together. Police were counting on somebody who saw something, because back then, police relied on that grunt work, putting their shoes to the pavement, walking around, gathering clues and information so they could piece things together. There were no Ring camera doorbells or cell phones. They had to go to every door throughout the entire neighborhood and beyond, just crossing their fingers and hoping they would get a lead. And they did. A couple of the neighbors reported seeing a man in the area the last few days who matched the description. They said they saw him around Karen's house at one point, and other neighbors said, "Yep, we saw him too, and he did not belong here." He was walking around, and they didn't recognize him as part of their little community. This man was still out there, and women in this town were starting to become very frightened. They did not feel safe. They wanted this guy identified immediately, brought in, and arrested. There was a group of young moms that would get together regularly, and all of them were questioning if one of them was going to be next. So, what about Karen? Can't she just tell the police what happened and who did this to her? Well, no, unfortunately she can't because she's in a coma. Karen had been asphyxiated with those pantyhose. They had been tightly wound around her neck to the point that it was cutting off her oxygen. Unfortunately, she fell unconscious and she had not woken up yet, and she never would. That's right, Karen was unable to ever become fully conscious again. It was heartbreaking. Karen's friends and family had to be informed that unfortunately there was nothing the doctors could do. Karen had already suffered brain damage as a result of the lack of oxygen to her brain, and ultimately the decision was made to take Karen off life support. Karen was unable to breathe on her own, and she passed away on February 4th, 1976, at only 32 years old, leaving her two young sons behind. It's absolutely heartbreaking to think of those two little boys who no longer have a mother. Now, this was a homicide investigation. The investigators got the autopsy report back, and it was obvious that Karen fought for her life. There were defensive wounds on her body, and there were also ligature marks around her neck. At this point, the medical examiner was able to determine that she had suffered from a lack of oxygen for an extended period of time, most likely when the pantyhose and bra strap were around her neck, as she was lying there without assistance. It was said that if someone had come even 10 minutes earlier, she may not have died. Maybe this man would have been interrupted before he started strangling her, but that didn't happen. After analyzing the entire crime scene, they were able to determine that someone had definitely gone through a lot of the possessions in the home, and they had taken things. From what they could tell, it seemed as though this person was hiding inside Karen's house, waiting. When she came inside, they saw she was injured. She couldn't resist, and she couldn't run very fast, so they took advantage of her. Based on their analysis, they believed that Karen had actually been stalked, and that this person was lying in wait, ready to attack. Once this became a homicide investigation, the media went crazy, not just locally. This woman wasn't an ordinary person in a little seaside town. This was the ex-wife of a Hollywood superstar. So now all kinds of media outlets picked up the case. Hollywood had their opinions, thoughts, and speculations, and there was a lot of buzz going on. Stories began circulating about what people thought happened and who did it, and there were many who wanted Mr. Bill Medley, Karen's first ex-husband, to be questioned. As they interviewed friends and family, they discovered that Bill had been trying to get back with Karen multiple times, and she had refused. So now they were wondering, was this some type of revenge? Did Bill want Karen, and Karen didn't want him? Maybe he came there to get Darren for the weekend, and something happened. The police always look at the people closest to the victim first, and Bill and Karen were still supposed to be best friends, still talking, still seeing each other all the time, and co-parenting. Bill was close to Karen, close enough that she would have let him inside. So, maybe this wasn't a burglary, maybe it was revenge. They brought Bill in for questioning, and he was absolutely beside himself. He was shocked and devastated. He was in Lake Arrowhead, California, with his 10-year-old son Darren when he got the phone call, a call he would remember for the rest of his life. They told him that Karen was in the hospital in a coma that she was never going to wake up from. They told him there was nothing they could do. He went down to the hospital, pleading with the doctors to do something. He was like, please, please, please do whatever you can, but there was just nothing they could do. Bill was by Karen's bedside, saying, "Come on, honey, the boys need you. We all need you." He was just telling her positive things like that. This was very difficult for him. He told the police that he was a wreck, that he was actually having an out-of-body experience, and that he could not believe he was planning the funeral of his son's mother, that he was sitting there looking for caskets for Karen. It just did not make sense to him. She was such a beautiful person, inside and out, and he felt like he was living in a horror movie. The other thing was that Bill did not match the description of the man people saw walking around Hermosa. Not to mention, everyone knew who Bill Medley was and what he looked like, including Sue and Noel. They knew it wasn't Bill coming out of Karen's house that day. Bill was completely cooperative with the police, and he had an alibi. He was out of town with his son. They were out there to buy a cabin, and that transaction did occur far away from the crime scene. Bill also gave the police information about other people in Karen's life, including the man she was currently divorcing, Jerry Class. Could he have had a reason to want to hurt her? The police wanted to bring him in for questioning. They go through all of the information that he provides, including his alibi, and eventually, he's ruled out as well. The main reason, again, is because he does not match the description. They had 2 eyewitnesses who saw a man coming out of that house. Let's not forget, and it wasn't Karen's ex-husband's. Investigators need to move on because they're running out of time. They already know they missed their opportunity to find this man while he was still roaming around after the crime occurred. Now, they have so much pressure on them. This is a tiny police department in Hermosa. I can only imagine the pressure from Hollywood and the community wanting someone to be held responsible for this, but no one is being arrested, and they're running out of clues. They don't have any leads. The next idea that the investigators get is to stake out the funeral. This was an extremely heartbreaking time for anyone close to Karen, Bill, and the children, but investigators wanted to go there to see if anyone suspicious came to the funeral, or if anyone was acting strangely. Sometimes people who commit these crimes sort of want a souvenir. They want to walk among everyone, come back to the scene, and sort of look at everything they've done. The funeral was held at Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. As they went through the crowd undercover, looking around, they didn't see anything out of the ordinary. They were getting pretty desperate, so they decided to try something else. Something kind of controversial and not very scientific. They decided to put Noelle Castle under hypnosis. She's the friend who saw the guy coming out of the house. This was actually the very first time hypnosis was used to get information like this in a criminal case in California. This was not something the courts were used to seeing, but they had no choice. They were going to do everything they could. Their goal was to get more information about the man Noelle saw coming out of Karen's house. So they put her under hypnosis to see if she could give them more details, like what his face, nose, and mouth looked like. Everything. While she's under hypnosis, they have a sketch artist working, and they create a sort of 3D composite. From what I understand, and I could be wrong, but I believe I read it was made of clay, this was the bust that was made from the description and the sketch during the hypnosis session with Noelle Castle. This is what she said the man looked like. He had shaggy hair, sort of like a bowl cut, but a little shaggier, hanging down just below his ears. He also had a beard, but no mustache. This was the biggest lead they had at this point in the case. They photographed the 3D model and printed flyers to distribute all around the city. Detectives were hoping that someone would see the 3D model and recognize who this was. But to their surprise, very little came of their efforts. So they reviewed the suspect list again and found another potential suspect. The sketch and the 3D model kind of looked like a firefighter one of the police officers knew of. Not a good guy, someone who had been involved in some sexual misconduct cases. They also needed to look into Karen's current boyfriend, so they brought the firefighter in. He told investigators he was back in Orange County at his accountant's office, getting his taxes done, and had nothing to do with the crime. They decided to map out the route from where the firefighter was to Karen's house to see if he could have had time to carry out the crime. It turns out the timeline just didn't fit, and there was other specific information provided that ruled him out. The same thing happened with Karen's boyfriend. It was unlikely, though possible but highly unlikely, that there were two men inside Karen's house that day. Meaning, if somebody didn't match the description of the man the women saw coming out, they were probably not involved. It was improbable that another guy was hiding in there, responsible for the crime. There were two other suspects in Karen's murder, a neighbor's son and his friend. This was because detectives considered the possibility that Karen's murder might have been motivated by revenge. These two young men had argued with her husband, Jerry, at the time. However, upon confirming their alibis, the two young men were also cleared. Karen's murder was eventually classified as a cold case. Unfortunately, years went by, you already know how many, and then it was 1984. I already hinted at the McMartin preschool investigation. Well, during that investigation, detectives briefly reopened Karen's case because they wanted to make sure there wasn't any kind of link between the alleged satanic ritual situation at the preschool and Karen's murder. I'm not going to go into detail, but a woman named Virginia McMartin founded and ran the McMartin preschool in Manhattan Beach. This is what is there now. It is just a dry cleaning business. But this is where it used to be located, and this is where it was in proximity to Karen's house. It was just 5 minutes away. Virginia, the owner of the preschool, had a daughter, Peggy McMartin Bucky, and Peggy also worked at the school as an administrator. Peggy's son, Ray Bucky, was a teacher there, and his sister, also named Peggy after their mom, worked there part-time as well. It was a family business. One of the students' mothers noticed a rash on her son's bottom during the summer of 1983, and she claimed that Ray Bucky did something indecent to her son. But that's not all. She went on to make further pretty outrageous allegations. In 1990, the New York Times wrote an article where this mother reported that the daycare employees had relations with animals and that they were Satanists. Following these initial allegations, the police interviewed hundreds of children and parents of children who had previously attended McMartin Preschool or were currently enrolled. During the spring of 1984, more than 350 students and former students claimed that they had been mistreated as part of a satanic ritual. In total, more than 321 charges were filed against 7 of the McMartin Preschool employees, and this trial ended up lasting 7 years, costing the state of California millions of dollars. But by 1990, all of the charges against the employees and the owners were dropped. Meanwhile, detectives found no link between the school and Karen's murder. But it did need to be looked into, considering her son did attend around the time frame that other children who came forward were also in attendance. That same year, detectives on Karen's case met with detectives from across the country to discuss something else. Someone else, an alleged serial killer named Henry Lee Lucas. He had been linked to several hundred murders, but Karen's case was not one of them. In the end, detectives found out that Henry Lee Lucas was a serial false confessor. He would confess to murder after murder after murder, using information that police were sort of feeding to him. He did this so he could get special treatment in prison. Although Henry Lee Lucas did confess to killing many people, it's actually believed that he did not commit nearly as many crimes as he claimed, and he definitely was not connected to Karen's murder. Back in 1976, when this crime occurred, DNA was collected in the form of semen on Karen's body and a towel, as I mentioned, but the technology was not advanced enough at the time to make any kind of determination about who that semen belonged to. However, by 1999, detectives tried using CODIS to identify their suspect. This database includes anyone who has been in prison or even arrested in county jail in certain states and counties, because some places require a DNA sample to be taken, and those samples are put into CODIS. So the semen DNA from the towel at Karen's was put into CODIS to see if there was a match, but it was unsuccessful. There were no matches. It was a waiting game because there was something I did not know with all the cases I do. I did not know that once a DNA sample is submitted, it is automatically run from time to time by CODIS over the years to see if any new criminal matches come into the database. However, in order for this to happen, you have to rely on the killer getting caught for some other crime to get into the database. Detectives investigating Karen's murder were losing hope that justice would ever be served. 10 years after submitting that DNA to CODIS, detectives decided to revisit the case again. It's hard to forget Karen's case for many reasons, but one of them for me now is if I ever hear any of the Righteous Brothers songs, I will instantly think of Karen. The investigators who worked on this case were of the age group that listened to and knew the Righteous Brothers so much. It came from their generation. So, this case most likely stayed on their minds throughout the years. They believed there were still witnesses and people who knew more about this murder who hadn't spoken up yet. Plus, DNA technology had advanced, and detectives began considering creating an even better DNA sample because now there was another way to match criminals to crimes through their relatives. It's called familial DNA. What this means is that maybe a cousin, an uncle, a sister, a brother, or your dad commits a crime, and their DNA is in CODIS, but the killer's isn't yet. Well, with this new technique, still looked at as controversial by the way for privacy reasons, which is at the top of the list, it was being considered as a way to find a connection in Karen's case. If they connect a relative's DNA, they can track down that relative and find out if they can provide insight or if they know whether their family member committed this crime. The cold case detectives considered familial DNA for Karen's murderer. At the time, familial DNA was only legal in 10 states. The method was called into question by human rights activists because they claimed that it produced false leads and violated people's privacy. How it works is that through a DNA database, such as one called GDmatch, familial DNA searches try to find relatives of these potential suspects. Despite their inability to match that exact person, they can get a partial match. When they identify this child, sibling, or other blood relative, they can go through that suspect's family tree, which can contain hundreds or thousands of relatives. So what they do is have a genealogist create this suspect's family tree and build it out. Then, they use circumstantial evidence collected over the years to narrow down their search to one person who had the means, motive, and opportunity to commit the crime. For example, after 30 years since his last crime spree, the Golden State Killer was finally identified as former police officer Joseph DeAngelo, and this was done through familial DNA. Another California serial killer, Lonnie Franklin, or as he was known at the time, the Grim Sleeper, was found using the exact same process. But this process had to be approved by the district attorney and individuals all the way up to the Department of Justice here in California. They do not grant permission easily. But luckily in 2011, detectives finally obtained permission and they submitted the DNA profile from the crime scene to the labs for familial DNA testing. They were so hopeful, but it turned out there was no match. This was very disappointing because, unlike CODIS, this system for familial DNA does not continue automatically scanning. They don't have that function, so they would have to get approved again at some other point and run the DNA again. But these detectives were not going to give up easily. They requested to run that DNA again in 2016, and they got the approval. It was a go. From 1976 to 2016, there was nothing, and finally, there was a match. Detectives who had diligently investigated Karen's murder for so many years finally received that phone call that they had been waiting for. The lab notified them that familial DNA had uncovered a potential suspect through a family member, and this was huge. All of the original detectives on this case were elated. They couldn't believe it. Many of them were retired and were being notified by their colleagues that they finally had an actual lead. 2 leads, in fact. There were 2 similar matches, one of which was a direct Y chromosome match. We're talking about like a dad or a brother. So next, the detectives have to do what they would usually do. I know this sounds odd, but once they find this match, they have to interview the said match and gather information. All they can do is ask questions. They track down his familial DNA match and start to ask whether or not this person has any connections to Hermosa Beach. That is the first question, and it turns out one of their relatives lived in Hermosa at the time the crime occurred. When they get the name of the relative, it turns out they lived in close proximity to Karen's house. They start to gather more and more information about who this person was, and through that person, they're able to pinpoint someone else, another relative, who would visit this person on a regular basis and was in the vicinity of the crime when it occurred. So now they are very certain they know who was responsible for Karen's murder. But it doesn't stop there. They need a DNA sample from said individual in order to match it directly to the semen found on the towel. This is a long process, but they finally have a name: Kenneth Eugene Troyer. He was 28 years old when he used to visit his relative in Hermosa Beach, and he was also in the vicinity of Karen's home at the time the crime occurred. Throughout his life, Ken had a history of robbery and sexual misconduct. Believe it or not, he spent most of his adult life in and out of prison. So you're probably saying to yourself, then why wasn't his DNA in CODIS? Why didn't they match his DNA sooner? The answer is because the CODIS system didn't start until about the 90s. They didn't start acquiring DNA for this database until then, so any crimes that happened before that database was created wouldn't have been in the system unless Kenneth had committed a crime after the system was created. Does that make sense? And his motive? Well, robbery. He would burglarize homes, and he wasn't in jail or prison on January 30th, 1976, which means he had the opportunity to commit this crime. This man was not a stable person. He had already committed various crimes just like the one that was committed on Karen. Except, obviously, Hers turned into something more extreme, since she was actually killed in the commission of that forced intercourse. Without even getting a match, because they hadn't compared his exact DNA to the semen, they already know it is highly probable that this is their guy, considering everything else is circumstantial. And this is a controversial type of DNA match. They have to be even more diligent and make sure that they can prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is the person who committed this crime. So the sheriff's department was able to obtain a sample of Kenneth Eugene Troyer's DNA, and it was a 100% exact match to the semen that was on that towel at Karen's house. This was the man who burglarized Karen's home, severely injured her in the course of a struggle to force himself upon her, and ultimately strangled her to death. But when they were going to do something about it, like arrest him, that's when they got some very unexpected and disappointing news. Kenneth is dead. That was the other reason he stopped committing crimes, because he was dead. He died back in 1982. I should say killed. He was killed by a police officer because, get this, and this might be the only consolation considering he can't be tried and convicted for Karen's murder, but he actually escaped from a California prison. He was a serial burglar, and the cops were on his trail for doing this to several women. They were trying to hunt him down because this was a dangerous man, and he was repeating this behavior again and again. They were actually chasing him down in Orange County back in 1982, and he was killed by a Santa Ana police officer. Investigators were finally able to give Karen's family the closure that they had been waiting for all of these years. And one of those people that could finally breathe again was Bill Medley. His entire life changed after Karen was murdered. He said that her death changed his life dramatically. At that time in his life, before her death, his son was 10 years old, and he was living as a single dad in Newport Beach. But all of a sudden, he wasn't just a single dad anymore. He was a single parent, and it rocked both Darren and Damien's worlds too. It also changed Bill Medley's life forever because he stopped singing. He had to put his life back together. According to him, he took 6 years off. It took him that long just to get back on his feet. Bill actually did end up getting remarried in 1986 to his late wife Paula, and they had a daughter, McKenna. McKenna is also a singer, and she performs with Bill. She performed as a singing partner during his 2008 tour, entitled Time of My Life. Bill enjoyed a long and successful solo career after he came back to the music scene, even though he and Bob Hatfield split up from the Righteous Brothers in 1980. They still appeared together from time to time until, unfortunately, Bob died in 2003. Billy Joel actually inducted the Righteous Brothers into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that same year. In 2020, Bill had to have surgery to remove a cancerous growth from his throat. And that surgery kept him from touring for basically the first time in over 50 years, except for that time he wasn't singing because of Karen's murder. Unfortunately, after 5 years of fighting Parkinson's disease, his wife Paula died in June of 2020. Bill says that he wrote a song dedicated to Karen, and it's entitled Beautiful Lady. He performed it in Las Vegas at Harrah's. Bill said that the stage is a good distraction because it's always been a lifesaver for him. Here's Bill at a press conference that took place 41 years to the day after Karen's murder. This case really wouldn't have been solved without familial DNA, and it's only used in the most extreme cases. Many people think that they shouldn't be investigated for crimes that their family members committed, that it's an invasion of privacy and circumstantial, that those are the two biggest arguments, because you know when they find that match, they have to go question that person, and that person, that family member, can decide not to say anything. Speaking of which, there were some people in that neighborhood that decided not to say anything back in 1976, because, believe it or not, there were people who knew Kenneth and that he was most likely the person who committed this crime. He matched that description, he matched that sketch, and he matched the 3D bust. But they kept quiet, and when the truth finally came out, there were a lot of people who called it a cover-up because they never came forward.